All right, hello everybody. Hopefully I fixed all of our issues right before we started here. I might have just screwed things up because I kind of had to end the stream real quick and restart it so that way latency would be copacetic, I guess. So anyway, welcome on in everybody. It's nice to have you guys again. Sorry if I kind of messed things up a little bit there, but yeah. Anyway, uh it's been a minute since I've streamed. I hope you've all been well, especially with it being the holidays. Hope you're having a happy holiday if you celebrate, a cozy day if not. So anyway, today's stream is going to mostly be covering the topic of Lords of the Fallen because I enjoyed this game quite a decent amount, but turns out it was a lot more polarizing than I ever would have expected. So I'm kind of curious where that all comes from. So for today, I just figured let's go ahead and react to some of these videos, get a better idea of why people dislike this game and or why they do like it, and just kind of broaden our horizons. And then tomorrow, starting Christmas Day, I will be streaming again more regularly, covering the normal lore spectrum of Elden Ring, Dark Souls, and Bloodborne type videos. So if you guys have suggestions for videos for me to watch, feel free to let me know in the comment section or on the Discord. I forgot to say, join the Discord, at least with this new chat. Okay. That's the YouTube link. All right, here is the Discord link for anybody who wants to join and send me some more videos to watch. I need to add a bunch of the ones onto the queue. Tomorrow, the schedule that I have set up for us is to watch a couple videos. One by Moxie Watts, the one by Nakey Jakey, Cosmos, and Wenders. So, From Software's game design changed everything. The best Zelda game I've ever played. Melina is an Empyrean. Understanding Queen Marika, and Dark Souls, Will, Duty, and Suffering. So that's for tomorrow. And then today I figured we can look at a couple things relating to Lords of the Fallen with IGN's review. I figured this is probably going to be the most basic and probably the best starting point. Then Ratatosker's very incendiary Lords of the Fallen review. It's bad. Then I have Smotown's the best Souls-like ever. Then Mortisimal Gaming's review after 100%. I think his came out like 2 days before my full completion review went out, so I'm really curious on their take about this. And new chat. Okay, thanks, Mortis. I figured that might happen. I'm gonna have to do some technical wizardry right here real quick. It's got the old chats. So what I get for trying to fix things on the fly rather than just dealing with what we had. Okay. Is that it? Okay. Let's go like that. That should be pretty good. Okay. Thank you very much. So, Jay Dizzle95, thanks for that comment earlier. Mortis, nice to have you again. You're just going to put your opinion on why it's polarizing here. You played the first one and left a really bad taste in your mouth, and then I probably cut you off because I ended that last stream. First game really bothered you. You got it for free and felt ripped off. Ooh, wow. So you're just afraid to play the reboot in fear of having that disappointment. It's kind of funny because I know you're a huge fan of Dark Souls 2, and I feel like of all the Souls game types that I've played, that Lords of the Fallen is kind of like one of the bigger spiritual successors to like the kind of style of game. And in my review, I call it like the idealized form of Dark Souls 2. And with that being said, I do think it does suffer from like a lot of the issues of FromSoft games with being a bit too obscure with its like quests and stuff. But overall, I think like fundamentally, like the actual gameplay mechanics are quite enjoyable once you get used to them. Vacuous Zealot, welcome back to the stream. You'd recommend a video called The Parallels Between Dark Souls and Buddhism by Noxcast. Okay, that sounds interesting. I'll probably forget over the stream, so if you leave a comment on like the video directly or in the Discord, I will try to add it to the list. That's why you're wary about the new lords? Okay. Hey, Scowleezy, special noob. Nice to have both of you guys. You like the first one and you really like dislike this one? I haven't played the first one. I'm a little bit curious to go back now, but, you know, it's going to go back onto the backup log of games I need to play through. Yeah, I have heard of Remnant from the Ashes. Haven't really looked into it though. I'm only familiar with the title, so I'll need to look into that. Two is your favorite? Okay. Snowdew, welcome in. You agree with my hypothesis on player burnout and tedium on the slow farming items they failed to try to implement? Yeah, it's unfortunate. Like, the thing that I'll say about Lords of the Fallen right now is all of the core mechanics are perfectly functional and they're really fun. I really do like the combat. It took me a while to get used to, and then it just kind of like got put on the next level once I figured out like the whole posture system. And then they nerfed the hell out of Hello Triptych right before or like right after my review came out and just kind of invalidated a lot of my feelings about that. But yeah, anyway. All right, let's go ahead and dive on into this first review by IGN because I feel like it's probably going to be the most vanilla and the most balanced intro here. So, okay. And then next we've got Ratatosker. All right, and let me know how the volume is for you guys. Oop.
If at first you don't succeed, try again. While 2014's Lords of the Fallen was one of the earliest to take a stab at recreating From Software's Lightning in a Bottle, it didn't quite hit that high mark. Nearly a decade and about 1 million Souls-like copycats later, there's perhaps no better time for its follow-up to take a second swipe. And thankfully, this new Lords of the Fallen confidently lands its strike. Its dual world is absolutely awesome to explore. Build crafting is diverse and complex, and combat is so smooth and satisfying that I'm willing to forgive all the ways it cribs from its contemporaries.
I also wonder like what system they're reviewing this on. I wonder if it says, because I know like especially at the very beginning, okay, it was reviewed on PC, sweet, yeah, because I know like depending on the player's setup, the experience wasn't as buttery smooth as they can make it sound, but hopefully like most of these issues have been fixed. They finally fixed like the auto stutter save, which is a huge one, but I haven't played this on console, so if you guys play on console, let me know if it's like been better for you guys as well. Snowdy, you disagree with my stuff about how to fix that farming? That's totally fine. It was just some ideas to like get the ball rolling. And if more people like add their comments to like my video, hopefully Hexworks sees it or just like gets inspired to change it. Because yeah, one step in the right direction, but maybe not a full step, if that makes any sense. A Bringer of Stillness Swords isn't fun. Yeah, Dex is pretty tough. I think Dex, the real value comes from like using the ranged options like the bows and stuff. But yeah. Some weapons are they definitely need buffs. I will say that much. You also want to hear more of my opinion on the issue with the fix it and post mindset and Lords of the Fallen when we were talking about that? Honestly, I'm thinking about making my own video about like what I would call like the almost the opposite of the fear of missing out, where the fear of missing out comes from playing a game when it's released and it's not finished. Because right now, I've platinum Lords of the Fallen. I'm a little bit burnt out on it, which is fine. I mean, I got my money's worth. But now that they're adding in all this extra stuff, I'm like, well, crap, why did I buy this game when it first came out? Like, more and more as these games get released in unfinished states, it just makes me feel less inclined to buy a game when it comes out and to just wait until I know that it's like in a quote-unquote like complete state. Or after like their DLC comes out, just because it's like, why screw myself over with like these waits, especially if the games can continue to get improved. And I know like a lot of people like to pedestalize Elden Ring as like a bastion of gaming, but I do think it is important to remember that even Elden Ring kind of released semi-broken when it first came out. I say semi-broken, I mean, yeah, you could go through the whole main game, but I mean, you couldn't finish Gestak, Nefeli and Kenneth Height's quest. Jarberg wasn't really a thing with the Jar Baron. So they added quests. Oh yeah, Patches' quest was incomplete as well. It still feels kind of incomplete, but it's better than it was. So yeah. G the MVP, welcome on in. You like the first Lords of the Fallen, but you just played all the Souls and Bloodborne for the first time, so you're craving more Soul-style games. It was 2018, so you missed all the bugs. It's rough around the edges, though. Yeah, and that's kind of... It really feels like it's deserving of its own topic, and I feel like I'd really need to deep dive into that stuff to collect my thoughts and write a script and all that. Howdy, welcome back to the stream. Ken Lee, welcome in. PS5 co-op is still busted. Yeah, I hear co-op is... They've been having some issues. HDR has to be shut off. Yeah, I've been having issues with HDR. No, not HDR. I'm thinking of something else. HDCMP or HD whatever. How is it single player experience? From the outside, it seems more tuned for a co-op experience. I really enjoyed the single player experience. I would compare it to Dark Souls 2 without any of the really blind ganks. And I say that as somebody who played it on launch, where it was more tuned up in difficulty, but too many players early on were complaining about the difficulty, so they scaled back like a lot of mobs, which is really unfortunate. Have I ever played Hellpoint? I don't think so. I don't even think I've heard of it. Alright. Let's go back to the video.
Some pretty severe performance issues and bugs, as well as disappointingly easy boss fights, means this latest thrust isn't quite a fatal blow, but even so, I expect to spend many more hours impaling enemies and exploring every nook of its cleverly split world. Lords of the Fallen is yet another action RPG Soulslike, complete with an unsettling fantasy setting, other players invading your game, and of course, lots of dying. A lot is borrowed from FromSoft classics, but there's also quite a bit of unique stuff to get excited about too. That includes things like some super cool dual reality shenanigans, or a nifty magical lamp that lets you flay the souls right out of your enemies. Those who played the original Lords of the Fallen will definitely hear NPCs talk about some familiar setting lore.
The time of Adir's righteous return is nigh.
Or see really cool and recognizable sights like this giant outstretched hand of a fallen god in the distance. But this is essentially a reboot rather than a sequel. The fresh story it tells using refurbished bits is much better than its predecessor too, with a
Yeah, I've heard it's supposed to be a reboot, and then I've also heard that it's not, and it's like own standalone thing. I'm not sure. So, like, you guys in the chat who played the original, is that true? Because as far as I know, the Iron Wayfarer is supposed to have been the protagonist of the first game. So maybe it is like a reboot of like an alternate timeline. I just have no real context for that. And Vacuous, no, I've not played Lies of P yet. That's kind of on my to-do list as well. Maybe like sometime soon, like maybe January. Yeah, and as Special Noob points out, they did buff a lot of the bosses after this review. This one came out like 2 months ago, and they've been like steadily, incrementally increasing their difficulty. I haven't gone back to like really test, and at this point, like I'm so comfortable with the game, I don't even know if I'd really notice if there is a difference, but yeah, I digress.
It feels much more fleshed out. There's some interesting characters here and there, and some cool lore as you meet various factions that you can side with or work against.
You know full well the agony Galinda can inflict on you.
Even if that stuff sometimes feels buried under a mountain of generic dark fantasy gobbledygook. Though Lords of the Fallen certainly borrows a lot from its genre peers in this way, its biggest original idea is also its best. Axiom, the physical land most people perceive, lies atop this ghostly world of dark abominations and creepy eyeballs called Umbral, which you can swap to using a magic lantern. As you run around killing bosses and kicking scrubs off of ledges, you'll need to navigate both, which adds a really novel new way to explore the environment.
Yeah, I really did enjoy the whole traversal between Axiom and Umbral, and I do think they should get like a bit more credit for like hinting at where those points would be, because they use like the little moths to give players some more visual hints when you're just in like the light world Axiom and all that. So yeah. So, SNX, welcome back to the stream. Nice to have you again. Yeah, so as you guys said, Lords of the Fallen 2023 is supposed to take place like 1,000 years after the original. Okay, that's what I heard, so thanks for letting me know. So yeah, it's not exactly... I guess by reboot, they just mean like they're reviving the franchise rather than like remaking an original game, I guess. Okay.
Example, a broken bridge might block your progress in the normal world, but be crossable in Umbral. This mechanic has enormous impact on nearly every aspect of Lords of the Fallen, from combat where normally imperceivable enemies become a major threat when you enter Umbral, to exploration, since each area essentially has 2 versions, warranting multiple runs through the same section to see what you missed.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised at how much I ended up missing, because I'm a pretty thorough player for the most part, but like there was something that I like missed in the chest in the first village on like all 3 playthroughs. So it was only when I was like going back to complete everything that I found I had missed something even in like the very first area.
It's a shame, though, that Lords of the Fallen doesn't quite seem capable of supporting its cross-dimensional ambitions from a technical standpoint, as it suffers from some pretty serious performance issues. Even with my GeForce RTX 4090 GPU and Ryzen 9 7950X 3D CPU,
Oof.
I encountered stuttering and dropped frames on a regular basis, especially...
And to be fair, like they have patched more of the co-op. It's definitely had like a rough couple months. Hopefully, you know, in a couple months after this, it'll be even more smooth. The few times that I have done co-op, it's been pretty okay. I did a lot of PvP like very early on because I just like abused like some of the more busted things like the Judge Cleric banner that would just one-shot people. It was pretty disgusting. But I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do to get those rewards, right?
After prolonged sessions, and those problems were shared in some form or another by everyone I played with. It's especially frustrating when lost frames lead to taking hits I otherwise may have avoided, or when my co-op partners got killed after their game turned into a slideshow during multiplayer. I'm not usually one to whinge about performance benchmarks or less than perfect frame rates, but these were so consistent and impossible to ignore that it was like eating a delicious meal with a severe toothache. Thankfully, Lords of the Fallen's otherwise lovely areas are still a ton of fun to explore when its frame rate manages to behave, from the fiery ashes of the city of Calrath to the treacherous steps of a monastery in the mountains. Level design is some of the best of the genre in recent memory, interesting and often...
So weird that they added like the double speed just like holding down the mouse button. But yeah, I was gonna say that as far as like the frame rates and stuff go, for my single player experience, I very rarely had like any issues. I did have a crash every now and then, but just in general, co-op is where like the game really suffers. So if you're a more single player mindset type of individual, I would still definitely recommend Lords of the Fallen. But if you are a like co-op gamer, I would, you know, say maybe hold off, wait for the game to stabilize a bit more, pick it up when it's on sale. Yeah.
Level design is some of the best of the genre in recent memory, with interesting and often breathtaking environments, tons of secrets to discover, and loads of unique enemies to fight, introduced one at a time via mini-boss fights throughout the roughly 40-hour campaign.
I'm a little bit surprised they said that they had like so many enemies. I don't necessarily like think that's fully misleading, but it does get a little bit tiresome towards the end when you just get so many enemies repeated throughout the game. I honestly didn't really mind it too much, but I know that others did. I do think if there was like 1 or 2 extra Umbral enemies specifically, that would help even out the feel of the game. Just because when you're spending so much time in Umbral, but seeing the same, you know, like 4 enemies, it gets a little bit redundant, I guess.
Taking down armies of wretched skeletal abominations is a lively whirlwind of blades and flails being swung and parried, making it play more smoothly than the vast majority of its peers, even if that dance feels extremely conventional at this point. You can be a brawny bruiser wielding the all-reliable sword and board, this quick and precise Bloodborne dude, or a variety of ranged magic users with cool but by-the-numbers abilities like covering levels in fire and lava or blessing you and your allies with health regenerating effects. It's also great that many of the areas you'll fight your way through are legitimately challenging, often filled with elite enemies who swarm you with devastating attacks in claustrophobic environments that have numerous ways to get yourself killed. Really, the only issue is that enemies are as dumb as a bag of hair, which isn't exactly a unique problem in the genre, but it's always amusing to see these morons try to figure out how to navigate the world's geometry, only to stand in place as you stab them repeatedly.
Yeah, and that is something that they actually have improved on. I can like speak for this, that they've really worked on like the nav meshes so the NPCs don't get stuck so often anymore. But yeah, I can't really discredit him from that. And as Mortis says, the reviewer is honestly not that bad. You can understand what they like and want in a game just from listening. And a lot of IGN viewers just kind of don't have that, which is weird. Yeah, that's like the weird thing about IGN. It's a real mixed bag, which is part of what I dislike about it. There's so little consistency between the reviewers that I just kind of always write off what IGN has to say because it feels like a kind of like a corporate mouthpiece that's just there to hype up other games because they have like inside connections and they don't ever want to like strain those connections by speaking some harsh truths. But that's just kind of my perspective on it. Yeah, and as Special Noob says, the enemy density was reduced a few patches ago. So it is a bit easier now, and it's a little bit less like Scholar of the First Sin. But when I say it's less like Scholar of the First Sin, I think even in its original form, it really wasn't that bad. It was like the better parts of Scholar of the First Sin, Dark Souls 2. Pretty much, it had like the same danger feel as you traversed an area, and each level felt threatening and tense, which was good. It had a good amount of tension, at least for me. And it didn't really have like a lot of the blind-sided ganks that were present in Dark Souls 2, which I really grew to dislike. But then again, like just movement in general feels really good in Lords of the Fallen. So I didn't really have like too many gripes about that compared to like Dark Souls 2. Like I'm sure if Dark Souls 2 just felt and played better, I would have enjoyed it more. So just kind of like why I compare the two. So this is like Dark Souls 2, but it doesn't feel bad to like move and sprint around and all that stuff. I.E. Codman, welcome into the stream again. Nice to have you. Teen Sith, welcome back to the stream. You heard it, Scholar of the Sin made the game worse. Yeah, so there's somebody in the Discord community, 2Hit Good, who streams on Twitch every now and then, and he was going through and comparing Dark Souls 2's vanilla version of the game to Scholar of the First Sin, and then he got burnt out between Scholar of the First Sin, and he said he was enjoying vanilla a lot more, to be honest. Call you I-Man? Okay, I'll try to remember.
Not content with just being awesome for exploration, your magical lamp and its relationship to the parallel Umbral realm is also quite useful in combat, primarily because you can use its Soul Flay ability to rip out an enemy's soul, stopping them in their tracks and providing ample time to dish out damage. Also, some enemies will have supernatural resistance that makes them nigh invincible, the only remedy being using your lamp to cast light on nearby hidden eyeballs to strip them of that protection. Finding ways to play with the dual reality swapping during combat really drives home just how dope that mechanic is.
So there is like one weird change, like earlier in the game in Pilgrim's Perch, if you go through the door where you need like the key from Stomand and head towards like the bell guy, there's like that one room that has the crossbow user, the knight, and like the formerly immune boy. And it used to be that you could kill the crossbowman and the knight, and the little prole type dude, he would have been immune. But later on they changed it so that way they were all immune, and you had to go through like the wooden wall to get rid of the eye first to damage the other two. And that is like the one change that I understand the least as far as like enemy placements and densities go. Anyway, it just kind of reminded me of that.
Obviously, no Souls-like would be complete without epic boss fights against disgusting monstrosities, and Lords of the Fallen has some cool ones. Unfortunately, unlike the levels preceding them, they're not very challenging at all. Every boss comes at you with slow and telegraphed moves, surprisingly reasonable health bars, and plenty of breaks in the action to heal up thanks to the simple AI, making death.
And that's why I also compared it a lot more to Dark Souls 2, because Dark Souls 2's bosses were typically like pushovers, with the exception of like, you know, the Rune Sentinels, and those are just like more endurance tests rather than like difficult stuff. But as we've said earlier, they have taken note of the community's problems with bosses specifically, and they've been, you know, incrementally buffing them. So hopefully they feel better now.
A pretty rare occurrence against them. It's still entertaining to take on enormous beasts despite them being pushovers, but even some of the more unique fights seem subpar compared to the bar set by recent Souls-likes. There's also just a pretty sizable layer of jank around this otherwise awesome package. I saw a few game crashes, had cool combat encounters ruined when enemies got stuck helplessly in the environment, was locked out of certain button commands like blocking for stretches of time, and more. Sometimes
that's
Lords
weird.
of the Fallen has original Dark Souls energy in a pretty unflattering way.
That's a
Playing with
good way to
friend
say
can
it.
make some of those rough edges even more noticeable, since it introduces other questionable quirks, like how co-op partners are tethered to the host and get teleported if they stray too far, which is accompanied by a loading screen. But those loading screens often take just long enough for the host to have traveled out of sight again by the time you load back in, leading to yet another loading screen. But
Oof.
teaming up with a friend is still a good time, and what I've played of New Game Plus so far has me and my squad quite excited to go back through some of the areas and enemies, with new lore, a whole new skill tree to experiment with, and of course, more difficult baddies to slay. That increased difficulty hasn't made any of the boss fights very challenging yet, which is a bummer, but the stretches between them are worth it on their own.
I'm a little bit surprised they didn't mention in this review that you can't co-op complete 2 stories at once, and it's only like one character's world that you travel through at a time. So anyway.
Lords of the Fallen is a great Souls-like, and its killer new idea of swapping between 2 versions of the world to solve puzzles and slay enemies is an excellent twist to set it apart from the pack. That concept is unfortunately hamstrung a bit by numerous, highly annoying technical challenges and weak boss fights. But awesome explorable areas and fantastic build crafting more than make up for those shortcomings. If, like me, you're a sucker for a quality action RPG, even amid a clear overabundance of them, then this reboot is well worth your time. For more, check out our reviews of Forza Motorsport and Assassin's Creed Mirage. And for everything else, stick with IGN.
That's interesting. Their score was a little bit higher than I expected, just because it's IGN most likely. I would give the game an 8 if it did fix some of the lingering issues that I think it has. Right now, I think it's at a 7 with the potential to grow to an 8. So I don't really begrudge them for giving the game an 8. So that, yeah, a little bit higher than I expected, especially with like all the complaints about the co-op and the performance. But yeah, you don't trust that score. You keep falling through the textures and you get stuck in them. Special Noob didn't understand the bosses are easy at all. You never got stuck, but they seemed too hard to you. Again, that's maybe due to using dex swords and having to hit the boss way more often than, say, a strength build. Yeah. Another big factor for like a lot of the boss fights comes to how much you've upgraded your weapons and or what runes you can take advantage of. Because certain builds can really trivialize things. The Bringers of Stillness swords are pretty weak. I've actually got a spreadsheet where I've been, well, I can't really say have been, where I did do like a bunch of like damage testing, and I don't think I have the Stillness swords on here, or maybe I do. Yeah, okay, so Left Hand Bringer of Stillness is extremely weak. It's yeah, its rune slots suck. It does scale with agility. A minus, that's not too bad. But if you want to get the most out of a dex build, you either want to buff with poison or lacerating. So you either want to have like a little bit of radiance or just use like 10 of each to get poison. Because dex scales with blood, bleed, and poison, which is, I don't think that's explained anywhere. So that's something I had to figure out. So compared like the left hand Bringer of Stillness to Andreas of Ebbsword, oh, maybe I copied the wrong thing. Anyway, it does way less damage. Like this does almost like 30% more, you know? So, yeah. Sorry you picked an underpowered weapon because they seem really cool. Like I farmed the crap out of them myself, so I don't blame you for that. Hey Mortis, thanks for joining the channels as a member. Difficulty is important, but it's no replacement for being fun. It's a hard balance to make something challenging, but in a positive way that's satisfying. Yeah. I found the bosses okay. They could have used a little bit of a difficulty bump because I feel like some of them just get a bit outscaled. But I think part of that could also just be depending on like one's route of progression because the game is a little bit non-linear. Like when I first played through the game, I went up to Pilgrim's Perch and all the way up to the hallowed area like first essentially because I saved enough of my they're not souls, they're not runes. What are they? Maybe they are runes. Anyway, I saved enough points to buy the key to go through the door, and so I did because I just kind of like went that way. And so I got up to the manse and the leprosarium before going to the fen. Alfarius, welcome back to the stream. Your biggest issue is the weapon variability. The game really pushed you hard into the faith build category. Yeah, the Radiance builds are pretty broken. I do wish there was a bit more variety in the movesets. One thing that this review didn't touch on, and one thing my review didn't touch on, which I probably should have, was that one cool thing about the weapon attacks is just how viable the switching stances is between one-handing and two-handing, and they're very fluid. So I wish I took a bit more advantage of it at the time when I first played. You got an ad and it bothered you? Yeah, I can't really control those. My fault. So take your $1. All right. Yeah. So apparently, if you guys join the stream for or join the channel for $1, you can avoid ads. Apparently, that's cool. Special Noob doesn't have his weeb weapon. How many spreadsheets have I made for Lords of the Fallen? Oh, this is the one spreadsheet. So for the thing that you saw in my video, it's just the farthest right tab. So yeah, sheet template, grand axes, runes. So yeah, this is public, so I may as well share this if you guys are interested in it yourself. If you guys want to look at some of the damage testing I've done. Now this stuff is a little bit outdated because they fixed some of the runes. So Dalway and Morem should work, or is it Makav? Either way, yeah. It doesn't say you can avoid ads. Just guessing. No, you guys can all avoid ads. Give me your money. Yeah. No, that's all good. All right, yeah. Thanks again for being a channel member. All right, so that was the, very vanilla IGN review. Now let's go into Ratatosker's negative S with Lords of the Fallen review. It's bad. And apparently Asmon reacted to it almost 1 million views. Let's see how bad Rat got ratioed here.
Let's start with something I liked in Lords of the Fallen.
195.
Blocking and wither damage. The way that it's implemented.
All right, let me restart this.
Let's start with something I liked in Lords of the Fallen, and that's blocking and wither damage.
Hell yeah.
The way that it's implemented here is by far my favorite system out of any of these kinds of games. And I deeply hope that Souls games adapt something like this in future entries. Basically, in Lords of the Fallen, shields don't block 100% of physical damage, no matter what shield you're using. Even the best medium shields block around 50%. and the biggest weapons block a percentage comparable to that. The damage that isn't blocked becomes wither damage, represented by this white bar on your health bar. This wither damage is the equivalent of Bloodborne's rally mechanic. You can get all of this health back if you are aggressive and attack the enemy, but it has some adaptations that make it, I think, very interesting. First of all, as long as you're blocking, the wither damage won't go down. That is, you won't lose any of that withered health. But if the enemy lands a clean hit and you're not blocking, all of that damage disappears at once, and takes away your opportunity of regaining it.
Yeah, and I think this is something really brilliant to Lords of the Fallen, and I think it is an actual like evolution on the Soulsborne combat formula. That, as well as the way that they've integrated the posture bar onto the lock-on reticle. So FromSoft, steal these ideas immediately. Stat. And also bring back limb breaks.
So long as you successfully block an attack, you won't die. You can take so much wither damage that you're at 1 HP, and so long as you block, the hits won't kill you. The amount of health that you get back is substantial. You regain a lot of big chunks when you attack. And unlike in Bloodborne, the wither effect doesn't go away. This means that even after finishing the current batch of enemies you might be fighting, you can still regain that lost wither health at the next encounter. This is a significant change because it doesn't so much incentivize aggressive play, but intelligent aggressive play. There's also a parry mechanic. If you block just as the enemy hits you, you'll parry the attack. The parry will do damage to the enemy's poise, which you can see by locking on. But the parry also still makes you take wither damage. In a boss fight, all of this comes into play. You can parry attacks to get through the monster's poise, but since even successful parries will make you take wither damage, you're spurred to both be aggressive and play cautiously.
Thanks for letting me know I was muted. Okay, yeah, so, Fudge. I was saying that I really liked the whole, like, parrying mechanic, but the biggest drawback that parrying has in Lords of the Fallen is that it comes out slightly slower than a dodge does. So if you try to block an attack or parry it, and you still get hit, it isn't necessarily, like, the player's timing that's wrong. If they're conditioned to dodge, it's that like parrying and blocking takes longer to execute, which is very unintuitive, and I don't understand why they didn't like adjust those two values before like the game released and whatnot. So I said something before that, but I can't quite remember what it was. Classic LP, yeah. All right. Hey Ponyboy, welcome back. Nah, the stream had issues. No, it's the streamer.
You want to be aggressive so you can get that lost wither health back, but you want to be cautious because if you take a hit, all that wither health will be gone. It's a very nice system, and it works well in practice. The only problem I have with it is the sound and animation that plays when you parry an enemy correctly. The parry sound is supposed to work as feedback. It's supposed to let you know that you got the parry correctly, and it's supposed to make you feel good that you got the parry. But the sound that plays is this extremely wimpy... I think the sound is really distracting. I just got done playing Lies of P, which has a similar parry mechanic. And the parry sound on there, now that's a parry sound that has some hair on its chest. That's a stimulating
Okay, that's interesting.
sound. It makes you want to get more parries just so you can hear it again, as opposed to the delicate ding you hear in Lords of the Fallen. Another thing that I like...
That's a really interesting complaint. Not something that I considered, but maybe there's some validity to it.
...is the way that spells and throwable items work in Lords of the Fallen. This I don't just like, actually. I'm obsessed with this system.
It's actually
For
really
years,
good, yeah.
I've complained about the way From Software handles spells. For more than years, for over a decade, I've been bitching about the way From Software does spells. I typically don't play mage builds, not because I don't like them, I do like them, but because I hate cycling through the spells. I hate pushing up on the directional button to get to the spell that I want. And if you have a bunch of spells, if you have something like 6 and you're pushing the button 5 times to get to whatever it is that you want, and you have to memorize where they are, I hate it. I can't stand it.
Yeah, those are some absolutely valid criticisms. To be fair, I do think Lords of the Fallen does have a couple of its own issues when you're first playing, just trying to get a feel of when you're using the lantern and its associated abilities properly versus spells. I do wish they were like mapped a little bit differently. One thing that took me an extremely long time to realize was if you're holding a lantern or like the spell thing out and you press the guard button, it'll cycle to the other one. So there may have been times where I didn't realize that I like pressed the block button and that like swapped me away from the spells or the lantern and whatnot. So anyway, yeah.
I've never had a good idea of what I would want to replace it, but I've always been sure that I wanted the current system to end, to get replaced with something else. In Lords of the Fallen, you equipped your spellcasting tool, and then you can equip your various spells and tie them to different buttons.
Oh no, the Metroid music. Yeah.
So you hold down L2, and then push the button that corresponds with the spell that you want. And it's very seamless, it happens very quickly. Lords of the Fallen isn't the first one to think up of a system like this. It's not that unusual, but I'm very enamored with it. I think it would work beautifully in Elden Ring. This is how I imagine it would work. You have a spell catalyst.
I don't think he's going to go into it, so I'm just going to rave a little bit more about it. For those who are in stream and who haven't played Lords of the Fallen, one aspect of it, which was really surprising to me and just kind of makes like a lot of sense, I'm going to back it up a little bit just to show the menu off.
In your hand.
All right, where are we at? Okay, so... All right, I'll go back over there. When you're on like a mage build or, okay, a strength build, here we go. So catalyst can be used, but if you don't use a catalyst, you can use a bow or a crossbow, which is really cool for like dex builds and stuff. And then like, there's also a default throw option. And at first you're given a rock and you're like, oh, okay, you have a stupid rock. It's not going to do any damage. It's, you know, the freebie, and I didn't really like pay any attention to it the first time I was like playing through the game. But as you progress through, you actually get a decent amount of like strength options for things that you can throw. So you can throw like javelins, war banners, things like that. You get some other like special throwable options which are like more like spell based and stuff. And so no matter what your build is, you will have a viable ranged option to supplement your build, which is something I didn't quite expect just because I was so used to the FromSoft paradigm of, hey, Unga Mabunga, you can't use any range, you know? But no, that's definitely not the case in Lords of the Fallen. And it just kind of like helped broaden my horizons of being able to enjoy multifaceted combat despite being an Unga Mabunga build originally. Do we think that if Lords of the Fallen came out in a world where Dark Souls never existed, people would think it's a masterpiece? Like, is it only polarizing because it's getting compared to others? That is a very good question. I don't think you would have Lords of the Fallen without Dark Souls. I mean, it borrows so heavily from the formula, it's a little bit frustrating at times. I think Lords of the Fallen is at its best when it deviates from Dark Souls. The things with the Umbral mechanic, when it deviates with the like old spell casting paradigms here, as Ratatosker is like talking about, the whole like posture mechanic I think is really good, but you could say like they borrowed it from Sekiro, but they just like refined it a bit. So like where they've made tweaks to the formula, it is chef's kiss masterpiece level, but the other stuff like quests, the build variety is a bit lacking, so it does have some issues. I'm not entirely sure why it's fully polarizing yet, so I'm very curious as to what Ratatosker is going to complain about next. Yeah, I think one of the issues with Lords of the Fallen is people might have had like some preconceived notions of what it is going to be, and it just didn't conform to those ideas. But maybe I'm wrong, so I'm really curious. Hey Boris, nice to see you again. Noob started with the spears, so before eventually going to the bows, the ammo system is good. Yeah, the ammo system was a little bit confusing for me at first because I thought ammo was mana. So, yeah, having an actual ammo system is also very interesting. And yeah. Thoughts on Lies of P? I don't have any thoughts yet. I'm still waiting to play it. All right, here we go.
Fallen, you equipped your spellcasting tool, and then you can equip your various spells and tie them to different buttons. So you hold down L2, and then push the button that corresponds with the spell that you want. And it's very seamless, it happens very quickly. Lords of the Fallen isn't the first one to think up of a system like this. It's not that unusual, but I'm very enamored with it. I think it would work beautifully in Elden Ring. This is how I imagine it would work. You have a spell catalyst in your hand, and you can just tap its button and it would work normally. And in this way, it wouldn't inconvenience people that have gotten used to, slotting in 8 spells and mastered the skill of pushing the up directional button a bunch of times to get to the spell they want. But then, you could also hold down the catalyst button, and that would show you what spells you have hotkeyed to which buttons.
And that's something that I wish they did with Ashes of War as well. That is like one of my bigger complaints about like the control functionality of Elden Ring, that in order to use my left-handed Ash of War, I first need to dual hand the one and then use it. It's a little just awkward. Or maybe that's backwards. So like, in order to use the right-handed Ash of War, you dual hand for a second, and then once you stop dual handing, you get your left-handed one use. It's been a minute for me. Anran, thanks for the 10, and nice to see you again. I should play Lies of P for real. I should. I've honestly been waiting to see if the Star Ocean remake comes on Steam sale, and it hasn't. I'm a little bit heartbroken. I wanted to play that, and then I wanted to play Lies of P, but then it looks like February is approaching pretty quickly here. So right now I've just kind of been wasting too much time with Path of Exile. Telephonesis sounds like the USSR version of telepathy. Is there cosmonaut to astronaut? Scowl says, a decent part of DS1's praise is how it's largely the first of its kind, if you forget Demon Souls, but FromSoft has improved upon their formula with each game, showing that it wasn't just a flash in the pan. Yeah, and so I do think Lords of the Fallen does make some incremental improvements, but yeah, I don't know, like, they have some systemic issues. So things like the multiplayer rewards, which I made that video about yesterday. So, yeah. Like, a lot of the problems that I have with Lies of the P are really easily fixable. Like, all of my major complaints are within reach that the devs can still fix. So, I'm doubtful that they'll actually fix the issues that really bother me, but, just huffing along on that copium until then. Yeah, it's just very polarizing. There is no middle ground. And once again, thanks for the 10, Anrand. I appreciate that. Consumables and Lies of P are completely cracked. So if you're praising Lords of the Fallen for them, I'm in for a treat. Okay, sweet. Extreme takes get more attention than being normal. You're not wrong there, are you? Noob says, you wonder how closely From looks at other Souls-likes? It feels like they stick with the mechanics because of the Galapagos phenomenon. I think just as game developers, they are aware of what other studios are doing. Maybe it wasn't Miyazaki, but I felt like there was a Miyazaki quote where maybe it wasn't him. I can't remember what dev said it specifically, but once Metal Gear Solid... Oh, no, it's Kojima. Yeah. So, Kojima said when he was working on Metal Gear Solid 5, he felt completely heartbroken, I think when Grand Theft Auto 5 came out, because it just completely shattered his view of what his game was going to be, I guess. And I think they put more time in the oven for Metal Gear Solid 5, but I might just be misremembering every little thing about this story. I would need to look it up. Yeah, I heard Epic Store is giving away Ghostwire Tokyo. I hear that's a pretty good game. Another really weird niche game. So, Liza P scratches the Bloodborne mechanical itch for you, but if you have muscle memory from Bloodborne, that got you killed a few times. Disappointing that extreme takes get more attention as there's little to no nuance and discussion. Yeah. I mean, that's just kind of how sensationalism works. Sucks to suck.
Let you cast whichever ones you want in whatever order you want. I think it's a perfect system. It does not intrude on what is already there, and just adds more options to those of us that want them. Lords of the Fallen is like that in that it has a bunch of good ideas. Another example of its good ideas is that it lets you switch from one-handed to two-handed in the middle of a combo. So
yes,
if you swing your
absolutely.
sword one-handed, it'll do a series of animations depending on how many swings you're doing. And if you swing the same weapon two-handed, it'll do a series of different animations.
Man, I don't blame Ratatoskr for hating the game if he's having this many FPS issues. That's pretty bad. That's pretty rough.
The interesting thing is that it will hold your place. So if you're swinging your weapon one-handed and then you two-hand the weapon, your next swing will come out two-handed and it won't start it from the beginning. It will keep your place in the combo. Okay, that's enough positives for now. Let me talk about some of the things I don't like.
Yeah, that frame rate is really rough. When the worst I had it was the one patch where they took DLSS off, because my system would run kind of like Ratatoskr's footage here. Like, it was just really choppy and bad. I wouldn't have played the game if it continued like that.
The weapon swing speed is too fast. As a comparison, a straight sword in Lords of the Fallen will swing at around the speed of a dagger in Elden Ring. And all the weapons are like this. They're a whole category faster than what is normal. Great swords are swung with the speed of katanas. Big colossal weapons are swung at the speed of claymores. And worst of all, these attacks don't really have any commitment to them. You can roll almost immediately out of them. One of the big things that popularized Dark Souls and the Souls formula in general...
I'm a little bit confused. Is Rat saying that you could roll out of them in like Elden Ring? Because if so, that's true, because I feel like that is definitely not the case for Lords of the Fallen, and that these are all pretty high commitment. Like, as soon as you begin your attack animation, you're pretty much committed to doing it, and it kind of... So, Lords of the Fallen has this interesting speed pacing point in comparison to like Elden Ring or like even Dark Souls 1. And I feel like that's why it's kind of more like Dark Souls 2 in its gameplay mechanics, because even though it's kind of got like the speed of Dark Souls 3, it has the commitment of like Dark Souls 1 and 2, which I don't really mind the slower, more committed pace of it, because this makes it a bit more mental, where you're just kind of like trying to map out what you're doing, especially with the parrying and withered HP mechanics. So I'm a little bit curious if I'm just misunderstanding him right here, or if I just like disagree with his take right here.
General is the commitment to attack. You swing your weapon, and then you're stuck in that animation. You cannot dodge out of the way.
Oh, okay. I'll just back up, so that way he like says his full point, because I think, yeah, okay.
To them, you can roll almost immediately out of them. One of the is normal. Great swords are swung with the speed of katanas. Big colossal weapons are swung at the speed of claymores. And worst of all, these attacks don't really have any commitment to them. You can roll almost immediately out of them. One of the big things that popularized Dark Souls and the Souls formula in general is the commitment to attack. You swing your weapon, and then you're stuck in that animation. You cannot dodge out of the way until the animation is completely through. And if you make a mistake and attack at the wrong moment, you're probably going to get hit as a result. That doesn't exist to the same degree in Lords of the Fallen. It is significantly less commitment-oriented. Attacks can be stringed together very quickly, and you can cancel out of them so fast and roll away that it looks like you're teleporting. There's very little delay, and there's no smooth transition. It's very frenetic. Now, I recognize that this is going to be a matter of some opinion. I saw people complaining about Liza P having combat that they consider to be clunky. And from what I gathered, what they mean when they say that...
I'll be real here. Part of the reason why I was less interested in Lies of P was maybe from like the earlier trailers, where it looked like the enemies took no hits done whatsoever, and it just looked janky and off-putting to me. So that's kind of why like I gravitated away from Lies of P, and more towards Lords of the Fallen. I also appreciate like the more like dark fantasy aesthetic, so that's just kind of like where my interest lied. But I will give Lies of P a chance relatively soon here. Bloodborne had comparatively fewer weapons, but because they narrowed focus, they could implement the transform system better. So yeah, numerically, Bloodborne did have fewer weapons, but even without like the transform mechanic, let me rephrase that. Without transformation attacks, you would essentially like double the amount of weapons that they had, because like each weapon almost had like 2 movesets. But then that became even more intricate with the tricking aspect of being able to transform it between swings. That swing animation looks jacked up. I do think maybe some of the animation issues might just be because of like the footage, but maybe not. Maybe it's just like a preference thing and it doesn't bother me. Yeah, you think the frame rate was slowing the animation? Yeah. That was a massive mistake. P is far more polished. Okay. You'll have to watch for my review. You don't really go for Sekiro style games. It's a bit too quick. Okay.
The combat is clunky is that it's too high commitment for their tastes. When you attack in Lies of P, there's a slightly longer delay before you can block or dodge again. Lords of the Fallen, Elden Ring, and Lies of P exist on a spectrum, with Lies of P being a little bit slower than Elden Ring and Lords of the Fallen being a lot faster. It'll certainly come down to preference.
See, that's a weird statement to me because, well, I do think Lords of the Fallen is faster in aspects. I actually think it's more, there's a lot more commitment that goes into this than it felt for Elden Ring, for me at least. I don't know.
Preference, but for me, I don't like this level of low commitment at all. I think
because like even when he's swinging, he's not stopping his swing. He's just going through with it. I think the issue is like the animations are faster than he expected, which I can see that.
That is so manic it approaches hack and slash territory, which isn't territory I want to be in. And it might be part of the reason why other aspects of the game are so bad. It might be negatively affecting them. For example, the levels have a huge amount of these worthless mob enemies everywhere. They often just feel endless. I have to assume one of the reasons that they chose to put this many enemies in a level is because of the incredibly fast attack speed. You swing very fast, and the weapons for some reason have incredible forward momentum. You're teleporting like 2 feet in front of you every time you swing. So traversing a level has you clearing tons and tons of these enemies, and they're not hard, they're rarely ever hard, but there's a lot of them. And even though there's a lot of them, they don't vary very much. You very often see the exact same enemies, with occasionally you'll get a new enemy type, and that is usually an enemy type that was previously a boss, and the only change will be that its HP is bloated. And it's not just
yeah, and I think these criticisms here are pretty fair.
About the number, the placement of the enemies and the encounters that are designed for them, I think are also awful. There's so many times when an encounter will have 3 to 5 melee enemies attacking you, and then also 2 or more ranged enemies to bombard you at a distance at once. And much of the traversal requires that you go through Umbral. So if you do that, just add 5 or 10 other enemies that are around at all times. It's frustrating to the point that I just stopped clearing enemy groups at some point and would run past them to get to where I was, and then maybe start clearing them again and explore around. But often, not even worth it, I felt. I would just run past that as well. That's notable because I've never done that before. In any of the Souls-likes that I've played, in any of the Souls games that I've played, I've never not cleared an area of enemies and explored quietly and carefully.
It's very interesting, and part of me wonders if that's just because of like, I don't want to say like an overexposure to the genre, or just like an over familiarity with the genre. So I'm curious if he would have done that if he didn't play the other games first, is kind of my point, I guess. I don't know. Your biggest issue with Lies of P is there's no custom character. You like to roleplay and immerse yourself in an avatar, and not having that as a turnoff. Yeah, that's understandable. They managed to execute a dark retelling of a classic children's story in a way that didn't bore you. Liza P's combat leans more towards memorization over reacting to boss moves, which can make it frustrating, but also makes the flow state of the fights much tighter and more enjoyable. Okay, interesting.
That's like my favorite thing. I am a cautious, Roomba-like player that goes around in small semicircles until I'm sure that I've explored everything in the environment. Not so here. The entire game feels like Dark Souls 2 if you combined the Iron Keep and the Scholar of the First Sin edition, and you mix that in with Shrine of Amala, and then combined together you stretch out the experience for the duration of an entire...
Oh man, I knew it. Like as soon as he like backed up here, that he was gonna go into the mimic. It took me an extremely long time to understand how the mimics are differentiated. So for anybody who doesn't know, they look like treasure spots, except they like glow ever so slightly more. So and they like pulsate.
Combined together, you stretch out the experience.
Yeah, I wondered if he was gonna like collect it before fighting all those mobs and just get like eaten, but no, that makes it worse. I did that in this same area, so I don't blame him.
For the duration of an entire game, that's what the levels feel like to me. They're miserable. And I have heard from people that like Lords of the Fallen that the level design is really good.
Oh, you guys got an ad right as I was reading your comment. Are the ads worse for you guys? Obviously, like when I streamed before, it was before like the whole ad apocalypse. Just for like the whole stream, I went and actually bought YouTube Premium, so you guys didn't get doubled up ads from like me reacting to stuff, as well as like the stream ones. But yeah, I can't really like. There's not much that I can do. I can insert ads if I go AFK. I can delay ads, but like that's all I see, and I don't really know exactly how that works. So I'm disappointed that like becoming a channel member doesn't get rid of the ads. I feel like if they like do YouTube Premium, they should kind of make it like Twitch subs, and that way you can like use like Amazon Prime like that you've already purchased and like apply it to like a channel member or something, and that way you wouldn't get ads. That's really annoying. Scholar, the First Sin, Iron Keep is straight trash. You got U-Block chugging on Chrome by some miracle. So Scaleezy, you said Liza P's combat leans more towards memorization of reacting to boss moves, which can make it frustrating, but also makes the flow state of the fights much tighter and more enjoyable. I think I just said like that was interesting, and in my head I was like, okay, that kind of sounds more like the original Mega Man, which I can see being like a good or a bad thing. And I do wonder if like, you know, if you're slow and methodical and just like watch the bosses, if it's like more approachable or not. But yeah, I'll have to see. If you're annoyed by it, it's bad. Higher tiers still have ads?
And I think partially that's true if you interpret level design to mean very narrowly just the physical space. Then yeah, the physical space can be interesting in the way that it leads back into the central hub area, evoking memories from Dark Souls 1. But in the broadest sense, level design also takes into account how encounters are designed, how they're designed to be approached. And those are just god-awful. It's hard to appreciate the level design of the physical space I'm traversing, of picking up items and such, when the game is throwing an endless stream of bullshit at me. I constantly felt the incentive to just stop trying to explore and just run past it, just run past everything. And that's not the feeling that good level design is supposed to evoke in your players. I also just hate how it looks. I don't have the talent to paint an articulate picture of what exactly I don't like about the visuals, but I think a lot of the areas are hideous. I have a hard time looking at them. And I mean that literally, like they give me a headache. There's no visual clarity in what I'm seeing.
So apparently, thanks to like Teen Sith in the chat here, one really big issue that Lords of the Fallen gives people is the film grain effect. And this didn't bother me, so like I'm glad that at least I've heard from others like a way to like fix this. If you take off the film grain effect as well as the gamma correction, that can really alleviate a lot of the problems that some people seem to be having with everything.
Everything seems to blend into each other. And it's not a graphical issue. When I look at something clearly, close up, I can tell that the graphics on it are fine. I just really hate the environments. I hate the way that they're colored, I hate the way they're styled. And it's strange because the enemy design is actually quite high. It's very good. And so is the armor design for the armor that you wear. Almost all of it is really good and high quality.
Yeah, I think one issue that Lords of the Fallen does have is like a little bit of one of like over design, where there's like way too many particle effects to the point where it does become a bit noisy. And I'm sure when people who are like more visually sensitive have film grain and the gamma occlusion like thrown into the mix, it can become quite overstimulating and a bit overwhelming.
It's a very stark contrast between how I feel about them to how I feel about the world they live in. Finally, the bosses. The bosses are a big disappointment to me. They are pitifully easy. Maybe as a consequence of the fast combat tempo that I described earlier. But the reason doesn't matter. The fact is that these bosses are supposed to be the high note of a level. You know, I slog through these levels, which I consider to be an eyesore. I carve my way through 100 of the same miserable enemy types, and then I finally get to the boss, and I consider myself fortunate if the attempts last longer than 10 minutes before I win. 10 minutes is a rarity. Most of the secondary bosses that are just humanoids, those usually got done in 1 to 3 attempts.
It is really funny to me to feel disappointed at like being able to beat a boss with ease, because I vividly remember my first experience having this was when I was playing Dark Souls 1, and I got to Chaos Witch Quelaag, and I killed her on my first try. And rather than feel like, oh hell yeah, I'm a badass, I actually felt a bit disappointed that it was so easy, which was just like a really weird feeling for me, just because like I had so many more difficulties against the previous bosses, because you know it's like my first Dark Souls, and my build was absolute trash because I had no idea what the hell I was doing. So to hear people complaining about boss difficulty is just kind of always kind of funny to me, because it's always such a thin line to ride between having something be difficult and challenging and rewarding versus going ever so slightly far to the right and it becomes like a slog and it's tedious and you don't want to do it, and then ever so slightly to the left where it's like not rewarding and challenging enough. So yeah, just kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, so you better get it right the first time, I guess. And let's be real here, the devs fumbled the ball. They took the L on having the bosses be undertuned in comparison to the levels. I definitely agree there. When we tested it out, Fake Love did not notice a change at all. Oh, and you were extremely relieved? Oh, yeah, because the settings. DS2 is the only Dark Souls game you haven't 100%. Yeah, same here. I actually also haven't 100% Sekiro, just because it felt a little bit too linear, so I didn't really, I don't know. Like, I didn't, like, so I did all of the endings, maybe not, like, the vanilla ending, whatever. So I did, like, the Shura ending and the Ashina Ishin ending, where you, like, fight him last. But after that, and, like, the Demon of Hatred, I was like, oh, okay, I did Sekiro, I'm good. But, yeah, not enough to 100% it.
Now, just to disclose, I didn't beat this game.
Alright, gotta give him credits for the Dead Sea from Chrono Cross again.
I've played for around 15 hours, I've killed 5 of the main giant bosses, and about 8 of the secondary bosses that double as normal enemy types. So I can't vouch if this impression that I've developed continues to the endgame. You know, it's possible that the levels, the enemies, and the bosses have a dramatic increase in quality at a point further than I am. But I don't think I need to fully beat it to give the review that I've done. I came into Lords of the Fallen very hopeful. I paid my own money to get this game, and when I have to give up my own cash and time, I'm always hoping that the experience is worthwhile. I felt I needed to voice my opinion on it, because not only was I disappointed, but leading up to release, all of the Souls YouTubers that I watch, and even some of them that I'm friends with, gave this game glowing reviews. And while I respect their opinion, I don't agree. So I thought it'd be valuable to leave my impression of the game as someone who was very hyped and ended up being disappointed, to the point he didn't want to finish. And that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's not like... How do I phrase this? I don't want to say like Ratatosker is wrong in his opinions. It's just like we have like differences of opinion about it. Like it's just the polarization effect where it's like I don't really disagree with anything that he said, but I just didn't really have those kind of impressions myself. So obviously, like some of the other criticisms are valid, and I do think the game has some flaws, but I don't think that the flaws that I've encountered are enough to make me to like really dislike it and actually say the whole game is bad. So it's just kind of interesting for me to see where he's coming from and just how much it turned him off. So yeah. I still kind of don't really know what to make of all that, and I kind of feel bad because I was like, okay, I'm sure I'll like get to the bottom of it with Ratatosker's video, and now we've got Smotown's glowing review, which is yeah. Anyway, let's just go into Smotown's review to get some of the positivity up, because now that I've been defending it, now I want to like attack the game.
Lords of the Fallen 2023 is the best non-From Software Souls-like.
And I am curious if Smo had played Lies of P before this, because the general consensus that I hear from the community at large is that Lies of P is the better game. So, all right. Not beating it will piss people off? No, I think not beating the game is perfectly valid. I do think that Ratatosker's review is legitimate. It does have value because he's not the only one that feels the way that he does. I think it's like getting as far as he did, it gives him a decent enough impression of the game. He did highlight the things that he liked between like the rally mechanic, or not the rally, but the wither mechanic and like the spells and stuff, which I think were valid. He obviously did give it a try. Lords of the Fallen, I do think takes a bit more of a learning curve than I would have expected, despite its similarities to the genre. And I think it really shines the most when you're able to like capitalize on the posture system. And I'm just really, really disappointed that it wasn't buffed a bit more rather than just like nerfed recently. It's just not what he wanted, yeah. No, I didn't think Ratatosker's review was going to be nonsense. I know he has some very like level takes, but it's just kind of interesting that like we just have like fundamental disagreements about it. Like there's like nothing super tangible for me to like point to. It's just like I'm like yes, and he's like no. Smotown got some flack for saying it captured the magic of DS1 for him. Ooh. You completely agree with me, but you think that's why a lot of people would disagree? That's all? Yeah, it's just weird because I feel like, generally speaking, it's really easy to understand where someone is coming from if they articulate it well enough. But this is just one of those ones where I'm like, no, I just don't really feel that way. I don't know.
Lords of the Fallen 2023 is the best non-From Software Souls-like that I've ever played, and it will probably be my personal game of the year. And while I imagine the actual Game of the Year awards will be fought between Zelda, Baldur's Gate 3, and Armored Core 6, for those like me who...
Alright, let's get our pitchforks, guys. No, that's some bold claim. Yeah, I'm really surprised, because I know, ironically enough, before like Lords of the Fallen released, they like sent out like press kits to YouTubers and whatnot to like go to their events, and Smo was like, hey guys, I really don't want to go. I'm like, hey man, just go, because like even if it freaking sucks, at least you'll have a story to tell, you know? And it's like, yeah, I guess that's all right. And he was like really on the fence and not very interested at all. So to hear like this like complete 180 is just really surprising to me.
Want a game that recaptures that Dark Souls 1 magic, an interconnected world in a fantasy setting with challenging combat and many builds, this game really hits the spot. This is my bread and butter, man. This is what gets me out of bed in the morning. Creating a character, being given a mission by a faction that may or may not be misleading me, and running around with a sword and shield, being killed again and again while getting lost in its labyrinthian map design. This is my vibe.
Yeah, and now like putting this in contrast to like Ratatoskr being like, man, I freaking hated all these little enemies. They just wouldn't stop coming after me. I got sick of them. I just ran past them. I've never done that before. And Smotown's like, yeah, man, I just got done killing all these little enemies. They kept running after me, you know? So it's just kind of funny having the two juxtaposed against each other. James Vance, welcome to the stream. You don't think it's the best Souls-like of the year? Lies of P is, in your opinion, the best game? You also have played 10 times more Lords of the Fallen because you're better at it? Alright, interesting, yeah. I haven't played Lies of the P yet, and I'm very curious if Smotown did by the time of this review. I don't know. I'll probably, like, message him later or something like that. You're not mad at Smo, but you're not going to take his recommendations again because we like different things. And you know what? That's perfectly valid. And sometimes there's a lot of, I don't want to say like validity again, that you can take from like having a difference of perspectives. Because as long as you know somebody's like general preferences, you can see where you align or where you disagree, and you can still get kind of informed by that. Like the video that comes to mind, obviously, in terms of like, you know, video game reviews and journalists is Donkey's take on everybody. Like, he's like, hey, I freaking hate RPGs. I really like actions and action games and platformers. So imagine when I say, hey, I really, really liked Paper Mario or Super Mario RPG. Now you know these games are legit because I don't like these games. So stuff like that, I do think has a decent amount of traction. Lies of P is what you call a Sekiro born. Has Sekiro levels of combat flow. Also, hello and Merry Christmas, everyone. Hello and happy holidays to everybody who celebrates. Hope you're all cozying on up, and thank you so much for joining me on this occasion. If you block, you can still rally back health, like how Bloodborne rewards hit trading. Yeah, that has been like the peak of FromSoft combat design for me, just like the rally mechanic. Not to say that like Sekiro is like bad or lacking, it just didn't quite hit that flow state for me. I felt like once I understood Sekiro's combat, it just became a little bit too formulaic, and I do wish certain parts of Sekiro weren't locked behind the skill progression. Like the Mikiri counter, I feel like that should have been like baseline. Because it's really awkward if you get to like the first speared Naginata user before you have the counter to deal with him. It's pretty rough. Lords of the Fallen feels like Dark Souls 2. You've only ever watched Dark Souls 2 being played? You've never played it? Whew. I don't even know what to say to that. That's probably the smarter way to go through it. DS2 does not feel good to me. I am a well-known DS2 hater. I think it's a bad game, and if it didn't have Dark Souls in the title, it probably would have been like forgotten and banished to the realms of obscurity, but that's just me. So I'm certain that a lot of even like my audience members have vehement disagreements with me about the state of Dark Souls 2.
And Lords of the Fallen caters to it perfectly. For the sake of transparency, I did pay for this game at full price on PS5 at launch. I was given a PC code by the developers, but my PC is just too low end for 2023, and so I did buy the game on launch.
That's an interesting paradigm. He sort of got the game sponsored, but he couldn't even really enjoy it.
Told me at the beginning of this year that I would be declaring Lords of the Fallen as my likely game of the year, I would have scoffed. I was very, very cynical about this game, to say the least. Looking at early trailers and marketing, I was very skeptical, thinking the game would be a generic combination of all these Souls games, but with no soul. I've now put about 50 hours into the game, on my second playthrough, and cannot get enough. Any moment of free time that I have, I'm firing up my PS5 and jumping back into Mornstead. The story, the lore, the exploration, the visual, the ambition, and the passion is so evident in this game. So if that's all true, why are there such mixed reviews for this game? Well, it mainly centres around some performance issues and the implementation of the co-op and why people were disappointed with it. I just want to acknowledge those problems now, and we will talk about them at the end of the video. But I'm talking about my personal experience with the game, and I wasn't affected by either of these issues. And at the end of the day, all I can really comment on is my personal experience with the game, which was tremendous. I want games that are made by people who care, who want to make a good product and are creative and passionate. And this is present not only in the game itself, but also present in the behaviour of the devs, who I was lucky enough to meet back in July, and I was seriously impressed about how much these developers clearly care about this end product. I say that it's my likely game of the year because I haven't gotten around to playing Lies of P,
Okay, there we go.
3, or Blasphemous 2 yet, all of which would be capable of taking this top spot. But Lords of the Fallen falls into that specific category of game that is my favourite game, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Something that recaptures that Dark Souls 1 magic specifically. And this game is the closest to try and capture that. And this video really is just an excuse for me to gush about this fantastic game. But before we go any further, if you like Souls-like games and you like lore, then please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video, as my channel mainly covers the lore of these types of games, and this one will be no different.
Damn it, I was muted. Okay, so what I was saying was James was talking about how their reaction time is too slow for Sekiro. You struggled to get a third, and had to give up. And then Teen Sith was talking about having more success reconceptualizing it as a rhythm game. And I said, yeah, I think in order for people to get a proper handle on Sekiro, they unironically need to probably calibrate their TV/monitor settings and their game settings, so that way they're getting the proper feedback of when and how to parry. Because if they are asynchronized, it's almost impossible to play that game. And I do wish there was more options to defeat enemies in Sekiro rather than having to rely on posture and stance breaks and getting the lethal blows. And if you could kill enemies more reliably through HP damage, I feel like the game would have been a lot more approachable for a lot of players, despite all the lack of upgrades and levels that most people relied on for a lot of the Dark Souls games. Yeah, I muted myself. Dr. N, welcome in. Whoops. The devs didn't even play Steelovsky and G9, who actually helped with the game balance, much less for positive review. Yeah. You wish they'd give us a Covenant item slot, which would give increased Covenant item drops in exchange for increasing the NG plus by one step. Yeah, I wish there's a lot of cool ways that they could make these drops a lot better. I absolutely hate when a single player game has abysmal drop rates outside of really niche things I don't know, in some of the Final Fantasy titles, it's okay to me, it doesn't bother me as much just because the combat feels better. I don't know. But just having to farm specific enemies and reload areas and having to go through a load screen, it's just not it. You beat Sekiro one time because you couldn't parry. It does have spells, yeah. Not entirely wrong, but not quite the level of spells that most people want.
The main appeal of the game is of course the world, gothic and dark, harrowing and beautiful in equal measure. I think even the most ardent hater of this game could agree that the art team have absolutely smashed it out of the park. There's almost
It's really funny hearing that after Ratatosker's review, where he says like he couldn't stand the visuals. So yeah,
a granular attention to detail in this game
granular,
to make sure that the lore matches
film
up
granular
with the
even.
gameplay. And this extends to the smallest of things. For example, should you choose to use radiance, i.e. miracles, you will notice that your character cuts their hand as they cast. And this is because the god of light, Aureus, is a god that encourages penance, hence the penitent helms of his followers, and the thorns that adorn their armour and weapons. The attention to detail here, that your character cuts himself to summon the power of Aureus, is just an indicator of the care put into every single aspect of the game and its setting, and that of course extends to the environment and level design as well, and this is why Mornstead is such an amazing place to explore, from the ruined glory of Bramis Castle to the oppressive darkness of the Umbral realms, and the claustrophobic tunnels of Revelation Depths. But before we explore the beauty of
Yeah, so even though I enjoy a lot of the visual elements of Lords of the Fallen, I do feel like it's a little bit too messy, because it's like, why is there really like so much smoke and haze indoors like this? It's just, there's too many particle effects. They really just like up the Unreal Engine 5 aspect of the game, because it's Unreal Engine 5. So if they just toned it back a bit, and they have a lot like for their optimizations and stuff, it's just a little bit too busy at times. Even though it like doesn't bother me that much, I think it could have just been like toned down ever so slightly at times.
Mornstead any further, it is time for a word from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. The best thing about HelloFresh is the convenience. HelloFresh does all the shopping and meal planning for you. Everything is pre-proportioned and comes with easy to follow recipe cards. HelloFresh is a product that I use myself, and I love how easy it has made my mealtime. As a content creator, I spend the vast majority of my time at my desk. Thankfully, HelloFresh keeps me healthy with quick and easy recipes.
He really said, let's make sure this
including
will
their
never run on
15-minute meal
PS4.
kits.
Yeah.
Less time than a takeaway, meaning I get back to my PC as soon as possible. And as we move into winter, HelloFresh Market is rustling up some seasonal treats, with desserts like the apple cider cake with caramel sauce, or the mini pumpkin cheesecake. So if you're interested in making your life easier and healthier, use my link or go to hellofresh.com and use my code POGSMOOCT16 to get 16 free meals plus free shipping. Offers for new subscriptions only. Varies by plan across 9 boxes. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. The beauty of Lords of the Fallen
Get your
is
money,
even
Smo.
evident from the first area of the game, the abandoned Red Copse village. The volumetric lighting in this area is incredible. In Axiom, the land of the living, you get a haunting red light passing through the trees, cast by the corrupted beacon in the distance. And in Umbral,
Yeah, I did enjoy later on that those red beacons are kind of indicators of where you have left to go in the story. So there's a kind of nice amount of visual indicators of how much of the game you've progressed through, which is kind of like a good or a bad thing depending on like how much you care about like spoilers, I guess. Amar Ben Israel, welcome back to the stream. You will say, in fairness, that UE5 is still new, so devs still dealing with the growing pains of optimizing their games. Yeah, but yeah, they just really like piled it on. I feel like the PS5 and like this system of hardware is, I don't want to say like not up to scratch. It's just like not up to the job of like being able to render all this stuff without like the late game, not late game, but like late gen tips and tricks of how to like optimize the stuff fully yet.
this is replaced by a ghostly purple light which also passes through the tree. It's impressive volumetric lighting. Soon after you will make it to Pilgrim's Perch, an area high up on the cliffs, drenched in torrential rain. It's just very atmospheric. Each area is clearly handcrafted to tell a story, and unlike in other Souls-likes which try to imitate Dark Souls' opaque story without providing substance of its own, Lords of the Fallen has a well-written and thought-out lore, and this is reflected in the environmental storytelling, which is really well done. One needs only look at the art book to see how well conceived and thought out these areas are, and how they're each trying to tell their own story. Again, just reiterating the fact that the art direction in this game is definitely one of its strongest points.
Yeah, I kind of have like mixed feelings about it because I feel like there is a certain decent amount of like environmental storytelling. I do think it's very fitting what enemies are in which areas because it shows you like the factional balances and imbalances at times. But a lot of it didn't feel particularly weighty or quite as impactful as I would have liked. And to be fair, while I also didn't really get into the lore of Dark Souls on my first like playthrough, it wasn't until like the world got like revealed for me later on in like videos and stuff that like my eyes got opened. I also didn't necessarily have as much of an inclination to dive into Lords of the Fallen as I have in like compared to like Bloodborne, you know? The problem with 100% Grimdark is that it's 100% Grimdark. Yeah. Doggy Shake, yeah, you guys hear his collar. If anyone wants an example of how not to do a Souls-like story, you just need to look at The Last Faith. Oof. Souls games aren't mechanically difficult. FromSoft just never puts in real tutorials to encourage experimentation, but a lot of people have a low frustration threshold. Yeah, I mean, so to give like a weird parallel, for anybody who's played Smash Bros, it's either like one of the best games they've played or it's just something they could never get into. And I think the real threshold that determines whether somebody gets hooked on Smash or just doesn't really get into it is when they find the character for them. Or like it's really just like the character for them. Because if you're not really feeling the controls, there's like this really big barrier for entry where you can't exactly have fun because you can't you're not jiving with like the core mechanics of the game. Whereas like in Dark Souls, especially like the first one, it's a pretty janky game, but it does have like a certain amount of charm to it, especially like with the weightiness of its attacks, like the poise system. There's a lot of stuff in DS1 vanilla that I like more so than like Dark Souls 2, obviously, and even like Dark Souls 3 and even Elden Ring. But so is it a low frustration threshold? Maybe. I also think it's just like you don't have enough time to get familiar with it enough for many players to find what they like to get them beyond that kind of like frustration threshold, because builds and like beginning viable options are very limited, and I do wish there was like more customization in like the Dark Souls games to facilitate having like a wider variety of builds in the beginning, because I feel like I would be more inclined to do something like an SL1 run or like a Blood Level 4 run if I could use the types of weapons or equipment that I would want to use. But it's just kind of a drag being able to use like, 6 weapons, which like only 2 are really viable for certain strats. So yeah. Anyway, I digress. You can be pretty attracted to a game that you can't play too. You think the Total Warhammer trilogy is amazing, but you suck immensely at them. Interesting. Yeah, a lot of people also like don't really play Sekiro themselves. I mean, obviously there's still that whole market for people who don't really like play games as much as they watch them on Twitch. FromSoft knows their intended audience. Sekiro wasn't for everyone, and they knew it. Elden Ring was meant for lots of people. Yeah, that's true as well. Okay, yeah, I'll just go back to the video now.
Vistas have always been a massive thing for me in these games, and it was one of the things that made me fall in love with the first Dark Souls, looking up at An Orlando from the Undead Burg, or the endless horizon found in the stunning Ash Lake. Lords of the Fallen also delivers in this regard, especially when you consider the 5 beacons of light, which are your main objectives. These are scattered throughout the world in locations that you visit. It is so satisfying looking into the skyline and working out where you are relative to these other locations. What's more is that if you cleanse these beacons, they change from red to a pure white, and this is also reflected in the skybox. So if you've cleansed 3 out of the 5 beacons, you can look up to the sky and see 3 white beacons and 2 red. It's just a really nice touch that makes you feel like you are impacting upon the world, that you're actually changing something with your actions. The skyboxes and vistas get even more interesting when you switch into the Umbral realm, where you can see massive Umbral titans dominating the skyline and wrapping themselves around buildings. It feels really alien and cosmic. It's fantastic and highly immersive. For example, if you look at this vista where I'm in the Umbral realm, you can see these massive Umbral titans reaching up to this eye that's replaced the moon in the sky. But also below them you can see the beacon down in Forsaken Fen, the first area, the first beacon that you'll reach. And so it's really great to feel...
I was just about to say, it's really a bold move, like describing the vista when you could just like show it. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that isn't like super relevant to the review, other than just like him saying that he like really likes the vistas. I don't really think you need to spend that much time on it. Just be like, yeah, check these out. I think they're super cool. I really like them. But yeah, at least he like tied it into like the whole Fen point later on. And yeah, I do like being able to see the later areas that you can visit, and that is something that I do appreciate about this game as well.
Feel like you're part of this huge world, and was something I always really appreciated about these Souls games. What's more is that unlike Dark Souls 2, where the world felt impossible or dreamlike, where the connections between different biomes felt unnatural, the world of Mornstead does not have this issue despite all the different biomes. It feels real and naturally connected.
It's interesting that he also compares it to Dark Souls 2 right here. Because obviously like he's been comparing it more to Dark Souls 1, but I do think there is something more inherent in this game that's more reminiscent of like Dark Souls 2 than the other Dark Souls games. Let him talk about vistas. He's clearly passionate and you love it. All right, I'll let him cook. I'll let him cook, Mortis.
You come to a poison swamp, a frozen peak, and a lava-filled castle, all within the same country, and yet none of it feels ludicrous. The team has done a great job in making this interconnected world feel both diverse but real, and it is definitely one of the strongest points of the game. As Fighting Cowboy said in his review as well, I think this is the best interconnected world we've seen in a Souls-like since Dark Souls 1.
I would agree with that.
Massive achievement. There are vestiges, this game's bonfires, and while they might feel far and few between, usually 1 per level, it is well complemented by the game's other systems. Because of the Umbral system...
I would disagree with that I feel like, at least in the beginning, they feel like they're way too numerous, or at the very least, like the Vestige seed beds are way too numerous. And I felt like I was wasting my seeds because like around the next corner, I would see like the next lantern. And I was like, well, I feel freaking stupid for wasting my seeds now. So obviously I wish that they would just like make that a non-consumable item and just have like a permanent temporary campsite item, or just make it so that there are a few more like lanterns later on, because there's a couple areas in the game which are absolutely annoying to traverse. Fitzroy's Gorge is one of them, where you're going between like the Skyrest Bridge, the Fen, and Calrath. That place really sucks. Or like the Shrine of Adir. There's like, it's just annoying to me. I think the Fief is also pretty annoying because in New Game Plus, the first Vestige seed isn't there, and you only get the nest one. So it's just a real pain in the ass trying to go from the very beginning of the level all the way to the end, or just like using the little vestige seeds, because I just don't understand like the whole like getting rid of the vestige seeds, because it doesn't really add difficulty to the game. It just makes it a bit more tedious to me. Lies of P made weapon durability actually add something to the rhythm of gameplay. Interesting. Weapon durability, that's always been subtracted from the experience. Ironic that Lies of P solved it while Bloodborne waffled and Zelda suffers from it. Yeah, the durability system really turns me away from the Zelda experience of the more modern ones. they did abandon it. Elden Ring had the chance to do it with some mini dungeons, like Altus Tunnel and the jail one, but they backed out for some reason. It's not a tax if the seeds are cheap. The problem is the designers want less bonfires and more seeds. They fought this issue until the community put their foot down. So, if they're cheap, then why force people to pay for them? Like, I feel like it's a reductive argument that if they're cheap, you can just buy them. The thing is, when the games like Dark Souls games make consumables like pseudo mandatory, it just kind of pushes people away from like leveling up or like using their other consumables, which can be fine within reason, but I don't really see an upside of like forcing players to like buy more of them, because it just kind of forces people to go back to Skyrest Bridge, which might have like some validity for like quests and stuff, but I don't know, it doesn't feel very organic to the game the way that it's currently implemented is my point. Like, why limit it to 5? Why not 10? Why not 3? Why not 2? Why not 1? You know, these are kind of all the kind of questions that I think you can ask yourself. And for me, it just feels very arbitrary in general. If there was something like, if you could stack multiple seed points, so like if they gave you 5 and your points never disappeared, I would probably be totally fine with going back to Skyrest Bridge to buy more. If like my very first seed got overwritten, if I was like placing down a 6th one, that would make a lot more sense to me, but it just kind of doesn't work for me as it's currently implemented, because even that would make New Game Plus a lot more forgiving to me, just because if I had like 5 different areas where I wanted to warp to, I could like place them where I wanted to, so I saved a bit more time like going through areas. But like I said before, I still don't even think that like really adds difficulty. But yeah, I don't know. It's a bad idea they like. Dr. N says, the problem with FromSoft and consumables is that they don't balance them well, and the ways the UI works is actively annoying to engage with, plus the artificial scarcity, especially in Elden Ring. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I still want to do like maybe not like a full-on consumable run, but like maybe a bow run in Elden Ring, just to kind of experience that more fully for myself, so I don't like just kind of speak out of my ass. Or maybe I should like watch one of those YouTube videos where other people do it, because I know they like really need to farm for certain consumables or like crafting materials, and yeah, I've always had a really big issue with the consumables and the item economies in the Souls games, and unfortunately, Lords of the Fallen borrows those designs as well.
You do have a second life, like in Sekiro, but there's also backtracking shortcuts and the Vestige seed system. Vestige seeds are items that allow you to spawn your own bonfire at a seedbed, and there are plenty of these seedbeds found throughout the level. And these are really great anchor points if used well to explore the greater depths of these huge levels. I have seen people complain about the lack of seeds, and I totally understand. You get them as a guaranteed drop from each boss, and you can also buy them for a high price at one of the vendors. However, for me, who spent a lot of time in the Umbral realm trying to explore everything, there are some elite Umbral enemies, the Moths, the Bringers of Stillness, and the Visages, that all drop Vestige seeds as well, and in quite high numbers. I'd say it's basically a 50-50 every time I kill a Moth, whether I'll get a Vestige seed or not. And
so maybe I should recontextualize why I have so many like gripes about something like this. It's because I'm a hoarder, and I will refuse to use items if they're made scarce to me. And like I said earlier, at the very beginning of the game, I like killed Pieta, I placed down my Umbral seed bed, and then I walked through the next door and there was a lantern there. I was like, oh, okay, don't ever use your seed beds. Got it. And so I pretty much tried to avoid it as long as I possibly could, because they conditioned me to not want to use them, because they were initially presented as being very valuable items, even though like you could buy them at the shop. I just wasn't familiar enough with the game at that point to really know you could buy them at the shop, because that shop hadn't been like introduced initially. So yeah, anyway, don't really have much of an excuse for that. I'm just the type of person that will hesitate to use an elixir at the final boss of a Final Fantasy game, because what if I might need it later? And I say that as a joke, but no, that's literally been my thought processes as I was like fighting the final boss in one of the games. And I had that like realization, like, there is no later, idiot. Just go ahead and use it.
So I had plenty on my playthrough, and they are great tools for exploring levels more completely. The feeling of exploration in this game is like that of Dark Souls 1, and it's this sort of untangible feeling, but you'll know what I mean. These are sprawling, well thought out levels that loop back and have shortcuts that feel massive and maze-like when you first play them, but by the end you have a real appreciation for how well intricately crafted they are. There are hidden items to be found and obscure NPC quests to be solved. And by the end you feel accomplished and immersed in this complex interconnected world, where fast travel is a convenience but not a necessity. This is all enhanced by the Umbral system, the two-world mechanic. There are two worlds in the world of Mornstead: the Axiom Realm, the Realm of the Living, the basic map, and the Umbral Realm, the Realm of the Dead. This is activated upon death, or by you going into it on purpose by using your lamp. Again, initially when I heard about this, I was very skeptical of it, imagining it would just be a gimmick, skin deep, but it is so well integrated. It is not a gimmick, it is part of the game's core identity and structure. Sometimes it is required to use to traverse a puzzle. Sometimes it can be used to find an entirely new area and loot, not present in Axiom. And sometimes it is just a second life in a boss fight. You will need to explore the Umbral Realm to get some important items, especially the upgrade materials for your lamp and your healing items, both of which can only be found as loot in Umbral. Sometimes you don't even need to fully transition into the Umbral Realm to interact with it. You can simply raise your lamp and peer into this second realm.
And that's one of my favorite features about the game, but I wish they like leaned on that ever so slightly more, where they crafted more scenarios where you wanted to kind of be in between the two. Well, not like fully in Axiom or Umbral, where you just like wanted to hold up your lantern, because there's only like 2 or 3 spots in the game total where you wanted to do that. So otherwise, like, I did think that the traversal between like the realms and stuff was stellar. In like, I guess if I wanted to compare this to any game, I guess Metroid 2 might be a good one, except unlike Metroid 2, there's not a lot of the very awful backtracking whatsoever. So the level design for me was the big highlight of the game. The Umbral lamp makes you want to get the game. Like, how did they program that? It's super cool. Yeah, I don't know. You don't want consumables to seem worthless after all. They need to stand out as a game changer. Yeah, and if the consumables stand out, they just kind of run the risk of like feeling broken. So like trying to find a good space for like making consumables work is very challenging, and that is something that I've come to appreciate in Lords of the Fallen, because like I was saying earlier, like the throne item system, like the spell system, they all kind of work in their own ways, which is something that I wish like FromSoft takes a bit more inspiration from moving forward. And if Lies of P is even better, hopefully that'll even give like FromSoft even more motivation to improve on that front. Okay.
This can give you a glimpse into this other realm, showing you if there's any important loot or some additional routes that are only available in this second realm. Sometimes you will notice that an enemy has a blue modifier next to their health bar, or a shield that covers all their health. This means they have an Umbral parasite attached to them, which could make them immortal or have health regen. If you are in Axiom, you won't be able to see these with the naked eye, and you'll have to risk raising your lamp in the heat of combat to find and eliminate them. But be warned, as you look into the abyss, it may look back into you. Because while you're raising the Umbral lamp and peering into it, you're actually vulnerable to Umbral enemies, and if they hit you, then you will be pulled permanently into the Umbral realm, catching you off guard, and being potentially surrounded by a mob of previously unseen enemies. It creates this sort of sandbox, where no two players' experiences will be the same, due to how much you interact with the Umbral realm. To give an example of this sort of sandbox and the discoveries you can make, there is a move that you can use with your lamp called Soul Flay. This uses up one of your charges that you can refill by draining enemies, but in essence the Soul Flay pulls the soul out of an enemy so that you can attack the soul while the enemy is immobilized. The hits you do while the enemy is flayed don't do direct damage, rather wither damage, and this means that if you hit them with anything when they go back to their normal state, it will immediately do all of that wither damage as true damage. However, there's a certain boss called a Mendacious Vistage, and it's a very tricky Umbral only enemy, a sort of mini boss. It's basically a big giant stone phase. If you hit it in the front, your weapons will bounce uselessly off it, so you have to attack it in its soft points, which are either at its back, or when it opens its face and reveals its true form. Now you can force these doors open that make up its face by using Soul Flay, and this is what I usually did so I can open it up for damage. However, one time I did mistime it, as the enemy does periodically opens its face by its own accord, and so I used the Soul Flay after it had done this, and I thought I had wasted one of my charges of my Soul Flay. However, instead I was rewarded with an instant stagger, and this was an accidental discovery. And now, because of this accident, I now keep my Soul Flay charges for when the Visage opens its face of its own accord so I can get that tasty free critical attack. In short, the Umbral realm is no gimmick, it is impactful and part of the game's core identity. And while the realm is very useful for exploration, it is also made to feel super dangerous. And this is a good thing because it feels significant when you choose to explore this realm.
Yeah, for sure, because since you have like the two life system, kind of like Sekiro, when you're in Umbral, there's a lot more tension that's just natively placed on the player because you know you don't have your shadows die twice mechanic to cover your butt if you're in a sticky situation. And also, whenever you go into Umbral or die, you'll get like your kind of full HP back, except half of it will be withered. So it does become more interesting because if you're in Axiom and fighting enemies, you might not elect to use your healing item because you know you might want to go into Umbral sort of soonish, or you've been holding off. And so there's a lot of consideration that needs to be taken in how many like healing flasks you have, whether or not you want to traverse Axiom or Umbral. And it does add a lot of depth to the game that I wouldn't have really expected without having played it myself. So it's one of the things that I really enjoyed about like the way the mechanics just kind of worked together with combat, which just isn't really present in the Souls titles.
If you willingly choose to transfer into the Umbral realm, you are giving up one of your lives straight away, and opening yourself up to be attacked by all the Umbral enemies on top of the regular enemies that are present in Axiom as well. Die in a fight against a dangerous enemy? Well great, you get a second chance, but now you have to fight them again, but now surrounded by Umbral enemies as well. Can this feel frustrating sometimes? Absolutely, but it is also a meaningful gameplay mechanic that actually holds some weight. To add to its identity, the Umbral realm has its own set of unique enemies, and these are...
Hey Aaron Vice, thanks for the 5, I appreciate it. Mary Heidemus, May the flame in the dark, thank you so much, and welcome into the stream. Happy holidays, or Heidemus to you. And Dr. N preferred being an Umbral on your first run. The exit points were usually more frequent. And you think it's the best designed enemy in the game, the Mendacious Visage? Maybe. I could see that. Pieta's also really good. I guess she's not really like a weak enemy, though. James Vance wants the developers to know that you hate their constant crusade against farming taxes and their constant Red Reaper patches. Yeah. It really does make me wonder if they play it, because like if you just look at the math or try to like play test it yourself, it just doesn't make sense. And I just really hate the people in the Oceania region for being able to get a shader and a half's worth of rewards for the same amount of work that it would take me to do 33 runs of. So they literally need to do 33 less than what I need to do of the same exact content. This is going to sound a bit weird, but the mechanic tells in Lords of the Fallen that you've seen look like someone in the VFX team does a lot of Final Fantasy XIV rating. I wouldn't be surprised if it's had an influence, to be honest. That's kind of an interesting comment.
Probably the most difficult and dangerous enemies in the game. Spend too long in the Umbral realm to the point where the meter in the top right builds up, and you will be chased by a fearsome red Grim Reaper, and it will chase you relentlessly over the map until you die. This is a horrifying place to be, and you feel this constant urge to return to the land of the living as soon as possible, and that is how it should feel, intruding on the realm of the dead.
So even beyond the red-robed enemy, the sound effects that they incorporate into Umbral is just kind of automatically tension building in kind of a similar way to like the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire type ambient backtracks, where it just kind of like causes the heart rate to rise with like the piercing strings and shrieking like woodwinds and stuff that they use for it. I don't know. It's just very tension inducing, even if you're not actually worried about the Red Phantom. Like I came to a point where I was like familiar enough with the Red Phantom that I didn't even really care about it. It's really just like all the SFX that are increasing my tension going into Umbral. We need a good late game farm? Yeah. I feel like a game shouldn't really need to have farming to begin with, but I don't know. You think Pieta and Eliane are the only bosses you truly enjoyed? Same for the one that ambushes you when you get the Rune of Adir. All the others were mid. I think Judge Cleric is pretty good. She's a lot better now with the patches. Sundered Monarch is a lot better after the patches as well. Some of these bosses are a little bit oppressive in New Game Plus. Like Abbess Ursula is probably like one of the toughest bosses for New Game Plus because she regained her health so quickly and just like did a lot of damage. But yeah. You forgot Light Reaper? Oh yeah, Light Reaper's a pretty good boss too. Yeah, he was a good one. Although I feel like maybe by the time you're supposed to fight Light Reaper, he's too easy. What I did was I kept reloading the game the second time I faced him because I wanted to beat him when he was like challenging. And so on my subsequent playthroughs, when I did fight Light Reaper at the very end, he was just kind of a pushover, especially if you summoned for him. Oh yeah, that's another big gripe that I have. Like, I do wish that some of the summon systems like weren't so obnoxious. Like, in order to summon NPCs, you first have to die to the boss. You can't just like quick exit to the game, like to the main menu, get sent out of the arena, and then like restart. No, you actually have to die. It's also annoying needing to summon Kukajin for every boss, or Kukajin for every boss in order to complete her quest. I wish there was a little bit more leeway. I mean, you could like skip one boss, but you know what I mean if you've had to do it. Errant Vice didn't play Lords of the Fallen despite your love of FromSofts. You just don't play this sort of game outside them. Signalis is where you were at the first time. So, I know you're a big fan of Dark Souls 2 if I'm remembering correctly, and I do feel like this game is the closest to Dark Souls 2 of any of the Soulsborne games. Like the Souls franchises included, to be honest. But maybe wait to pick it up like once they're like done patching it and stuff. I know they said they wanted to add a randomizer like next year, early next year, so okay. So apparently ads are gonna run in like 1 minute, guys. So I'll just go ahead and like start playing now. I just now noticed the notification.
I commend the team at Hexworks for making this Umbral realm as horrifying as it should be. When I played the game back in July, I enjoyed the core of the experience and the combat, but there were some issues. There was a lack of feedback in getting the perfect parry, the rolling and movement was overtuned and highly aggressive, and while the hits felt weighty, The sound effects were pretty weedy in comparison, meaning the feedback wasn't as satisfying. I am glad to say that in the full release of the game there has been massive improvement in all of these fronts, and I immediately noticed the difference upon playing the final game. The feedback for parries is now excellent. There is a loud noise and a flashing purple light when you hit a perfect parry. The sound effect
I thought he was gonna play it, and it's just gonna like sound exactly the way that like Ratatosker played it in his video, which is just like really funny to highlight this now after having watched Ratatosker's video.
effects have been vastly improved for all hits and movement, and the rolls have been somewhat toned down. They are still quite aggressive, but believe me when I say
Yeah, ironically enough, I almost felt like the light roll was too powerful, and especially early on, that's definitely going to get people like straight up killed in Pilgrim's Perch. I know that's like one of like the many complaints that the rolls are like they go too far, which is totally valid, especially like for a lot of players who are like grown up light rolling in the Dark Souls games and like accustomed to that. I feel like the medium roll is extremely good in Lords of the Fallen in general, and even like the heavy roll, like it really isn't bad. But obviously, I feel like medium is actually kind of the best because you don't run the risk of falling off so many platforms, oddly enough, and it has like a decent amount of iframes.
they were massive before, and so while the movement still feels a little floaty, the combat feels meaty and responsive.
If it wasn't for Steelovsky in G9, the roll would go twice as far. Man, that would really trivialize the game. I guess I should like give them credit about that. Yeah, they said they wanted to make a built-in randomizer. I would say like hold your breath. I doubt it would be like super great. But honestly, like if they go that far, I think it'd be a really cool feature for any game and could potentially like add more pressure for other developers to do stuff like that. Like I've been waiting for years for like FromSoft to make their games more approachable, especially like after you beat them. I would love to be able to customize builds or add like more like direct challenge runs into the game after I've already beaten it. So it's like if you like beat a new game, you just like open up a new like a cheat menu or something like that. Like pretend it's like, 1997 again, freaking GoldenEye, and being able to just like customize your runs. So depending on how this randomizer works, maybe it'll be a bit of a game changer moving forward. Who knows? Larian has official mod tools for Divinity Original Sin 2, so imagine they're eventually going to release them for Baldur's Gate 3. Yeah, it feels like Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian would have like a lot of potential to make that a bit more accessible. So they're probably just kind of like recovering after that very long development cycle for BG3. Dark Deity has a built-in randomizer. It's one of their big selling points. Just give us NG2 that doesn't scale so we can use our finished build or late game build weapons in a new game plus cycle. That's kind of why I think it'd be cool if using an Eye of Vengeance would make all of the enemies get buffed, or a Charred Finger would buff all of the enemies as well. Because that way you could go like new game 0, but still like have all your Vestige points and actually difficult enemies. Alright, going back to the video.
And to be honest, you do need quite an aggressive roll and good iframes, given how many mobs you will be fighting in this game. And I think dodging and iframes in this game are very fair and very forgiving. And in general, I find the whole rhythm of combat from top to bottom to be very satisfying. Lords of the Fallen can be played like any other Souls game, where you block and dodge, and then hit back whenever there's an opening. However, Lords of the Fallen also has a stagger system, a trackable meter around the lock-on, and I am definitely in favour of stagger meters being visible in these games. Stagger is a massive part in Elden Ring, and while you can get a feel for it when you're experienced with the game, I do think it would have been improved had this been implemented as well in Elden Ring.
Absolutely.
Every hit in Lords of the Fallen damages the enemy's stagger meter, but parries, heavy attacks, and kicks do more. And when the bar is depleted...
Yeah, one thing that it took me a really long time to realize was that any charged R2 attack can break open the posture system. You don't need to be like behind them like in Bloodborne. And also just like charged R2s in general for two-handing one weapon is extremely powerful. And apparently, like, dual wielding weapons is not the best for posture systems. So there's kind of an interesting trade-off between like dual wielding a weapon, dual handing a weapon, and one handing a weapon, and like using a shield, which can definitely tailor the way that people play the game.
Completed, it doesn't automatically stagger the enemy, which is obviously why you need a stagger meter to knock them into the stagger.
And it took me a long time to realize, like, once the stagger meter was like this, you could kick them, and that would, like, knock them over. I thought for the longest time it was going to be like Bloodborne, where you need to be behind them and use, like, a full-on charged R2. So, no, that's not the case. Like, the posture system is, like, one of the best features of this game. But it just took me, like, a decent amount of time to, like, fully understand it.
Stagger animation, when the bar is depleted, you have to kick, parry, or charge heavy attack them. Once you do, this opens them up to a fatal attack. Parries work like Sekiro, where each parry is more like a deflect that damages the enemy posture, but doesn't stop the enemy in its tracks. Unless it has broken the posture bar, of course. And I felt that this was the right design choice for the flow of combat. Whilst I liken it mostly to Dark Souls 1 in its exploration and bosses, the movement in combat is probably more like Mortal Shell, so it's a bit faster. And I found the best flow of combat in this game was not to treat it like Sekiro. Don't try and deflect every single hit, as this is ineffective, as sometimes it takes a long time to break a posture bar.
Yeah, and that was kind of my mistake. Like, I spent a lot of time on Pieta because I was trying to, like, parry everything once I, like, figured out how it's supposed to work. But that was not the play. So yeah, it was just like a very different learning experience. And Mortal Shell is one of those games that was also on my radar, but I heard like a lot of really mixed to negative things about it, so I just never picked it up. So it's on my to play list, but you know, it's kind of behind Lies of P at this point now. How much do we got to contribute to get me to do a playthrough of Lies of P? So I'm not sure, because typically I prefer to play games completely blind and off stream, mainly because like the way that I play through games is probably going to be really, really annoying for people to watch, because I'm very stubborn and I will do things like repetitively, even to the point where it almost feels like insanity, because like I'm not like making progress, just because I like to do things to a point until they break, whether that's like the game or me. That sounds a lot more dramatic than I'm really making it sound, but for instance, when I first played through Elden Ring, I probably reloaded the game, no joke, over 100 times to kill like the first grafted scion, just because I didn't like want to lose to it, and I was curious like what would happen if you beat it. Because like any time that I'm presented with like an impossible option in the game, I'm like, is this actually impossible? Do the devs have some like hidden Easter egg that you can see like once you actually beat it? Like one of my favorite JRPGs, which is kind of like it's like a mid JRPG, was Tales of Destiny. And there's this point in this town where the main character is kind of like inadvertently joined like a group of bandits, and so they go to this town and they get like followed by like this group of police essentially, and they beat the policemen's asses, and then like the captain shows up, and then you have to fight this captain, and it's supposed to be like a battle that you lose, and it's actually an extremely tough battle. You need to do like grinding for hours and hours and end to like have a chance to like beat this dude, but you can beat this dude, and if you beat the dude, there's actually a hidden alternate ending where the group of bandits that you're essentially with just kind of like laugh their asses off, and then you just go like on a stealing spree, and you just kind of like become like an infamous like bandit essentially. So that's like just like, I've been spoiled as a kid on like stuff like that, so I will really just go out of my way to do stuff that just takes a lot of time, is probably not very visually interesting or entertaining, I guess. Yeah, enemies have specific kick and parry windows that do more stance damage. So this enemy right here, he's almost posture broken. He's got a sliver of posture left because it's like a full circle. But now the circle is almost completely depleted. And when you only have the base circle in the middle, if you kick them or do like a fully charged attack, that will break open their posture, and then you'll be able to do like a visceral attack. Oh yeah, also with like the Lies of P or like a blind playthrough, typically my first time playing a game, I wouldn't want to have like back seating, depending like if I care about it or not, just because like, like I said before, I'm stubborn. And I'm sure like I can't really contain myself super well from like backseating others because I get like enthusiastic about stuff. And so I don't know. You'd like to see something like that in the next year, like 2600? You don't mind? You want to see my take? Without Horn says Mortal Shell has a weird system. You never got used to it. Okay. Welcome to the stream, by the way. Someone linked Protag taking 500 years to find Placidus Axe's boss arena teleports. I have that, yeah. It looks so freaking silly because it looks fake. Like, it legitimately looks fake that I must have, like, deliberately missed, like, Placidus Axe. But no, it was real. I'll link that. Or maybe I should, like, show that real quick in the middle of this video. Okay. Found it. Give me 1 second. Blind playthroughs of Elden Ring be like... So obviously, like, I'd already killed Melania. And here I am exploring Fair Missoula. I just got up to the Great Bridge, rested, and now I was like checking back everywhere else. The little stagger step. I should like skip forward a little bit. Yeah, I'm gonna skip forward like a little bit. Okay. Here we go. And so I missed Placidus Axe here, and then someone's like, "Oh, did you find like the hidden dragon boss?" I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about?" He's like, "Oh yeah, it's in Fair Missoula." I'm like, "What? I explored everywhere. There's nothing." And meanwhile, this is my experience exploring everywhere in Fair Missoula. Oh, it looks like I'm like baiting the camera. Maybe my choice of words could have been better there. Oh. I'm like, okay, there's nothing here. I can't really jump to these platforms, can I? Nope. So that means what? Nothing down there. I've got to go into the computer? No. So yeah, I didn't go back down there because there's nothing there, right? So yeah, that was me completely missing Placidus Axe. So ironically, that's probably like a fun thing to share, but it's not as fun when I I literally spent like 45 minutes trying to jump from the cliffside in the mountaintops of the Giants down to the parapets of Castle Sol. Just because I was curious if I could. Oh, also I spent like probably 2 hours, and I'm not even like being exaggerating this. I probably spent 2 hours trying to jump from the top of what's it called? Lane Dell, the fortified manors, like Divine Bridge ramparts onto like the rest of the fortified manor, like the little ramparts down there. I tried to like use soft cotton to like break my fall, and then jump down to the tower that's like on the left, kind of by Granzax. So yeah, I will do stupid stuff like that on stream, which is, it frustrates me, and I'm the one playing, so I couldn't really imagine subjecting others to it. Look at me now. Yeah, look at me now. I'm just in the body cast after getting like in a car accident. That was your experience as well? My fault. Rip. You want to support me in the content? Maybe. It's not the challenge. I just like the blind aspect of things, but if I do play through the game, I might play it again on stream. There is a game that I do want to stream for you guys fairly soon here. It's called Alundra for the PlayStation 1, but there's some like hardware stuff that I need to like figure out still. Yeah. More to come on that front in the future, but anyway, spending too much time going off topic. All right. Never get through a Smotown video again.
And you're just slowing down your DPS by not being aggressive. I found it better to deflect the odd easy to predict attack, while always keeping on the attack myself to not only damage the enemy's health, but keep pressure on the posture bar, and taking deflects when I can get them. This creates a really nice back and forth flow in combat, and when you factor in the other elements of combat, spells, your lantern, ranged weapons, dual wielding, and status effects, it becomes quite complex, and it feels like a wonderful dance, back and forth of learning your enemy, keeping on the pressure, while exploiting easy to predict attacks with a parry.
Oh yeah, one thing that I did want to talk about in my review, but I like forgot or didn't do it, was that even though it's kind of like a drawback for like spamming spells, I did have an appreciation for how it would give yourself like a status effect buildup for doing that. So when you're casting like all the fire spells, you have a chance to ignite or burn yourself, which is kind of cool. And when you're doing umbral spells, you could make yourself like get frosted and frostbitten, and that does like a bunch of damage to you. And if you cast too many like holy spells, you'll bleed to death because you like cut yourself to cast them. So it kind of does a good job of steering people away from like mindlessly spamming stuff. But I mean, you'll still do it because it's effective. But at least it kind of like there's like a consequence to doing that, and there's like a risk versus reward benefit. So there's a lot of balance between the ranged and melee options, and the game does a really good job of funneling people towards the melee experience, as well as allowing them to have more ranged options to deal with whatever they need to at times.
Parry. When this all comes together, when you understand the parry and you keep the pressure on, using all the tools available to you, the combat of Lords of the Fallen is so satisfying, and far more engaging and precise than I think some people give it credit for. Let's talk about builds, as there are tons of them, and it's one of the massive appeals of this game. Like Dark Souls 1, there is strength and agility, i.e. dex. Then there are 3 schools of magic, Inferno, Radiance, and Umbral. Radiance being this game's miracles, Inferno is akin to pyromancy, and Umbral is like Dark. Radiance and Inferno straight up have their own stats, whereas Umbral seems to be a balance of both stats. When it comes to spells, I've mainly used Inferno, as my second playthrough is a pure Inferno build, but when it comes to the literal mechanics of casting spells, I can tell you it feels great. I'm not a big caster in Soulslike, but I'm having such a good time using Inferno builds. It's easy to use in the heat of battle. There is no need to switch between weapons and talismans or have your talisman in one hand. Every build, every character has its dedicated range slot. And so in this range slot for a spellcaster, you put your talisman, and then whether it be a crossbow or a talisman, you just have to pull left trigger to ready your ranged options. And you can equip up to 4 spells, key binding them to R1, R2, X and square for PS5. And it really is that simple. Using it in a boss fight instead of having to switch between your different weapons and just pulling up your ranged options is so fast and so convenient. You have a mana bar which is refillable using mana items, or resting or dying. Ranged weapons also work the same. There is no single-use ammo. Instead, you just find an ammo-type item and equip it. You then get a set use of them for each life, and when you run out, you can either refill these by resting or dying, or by using a single-use item. I really like this, and I vastly prefer it to having to buy 900 arrows from a merchant. Some of the spells are really impressive, both in...
Yeah, and it also, like, helps... Like, the scarcity also helps, like, make you evaluate whether or not you want to, like, spend the resources on certain mobs, and so, like, it adds a layer of depth, even though it is, like, a limiting factor. So you don't necessarily have to, like, refarm all the items because you can get, like, the baseline, but you can still restock your ammo supply with, like, the additional ammo pouches, which is nice. And so even though I was complaining a lot about the consumables in Lords of the Fallen earlier, that's mostly for, like, the Vestige seeds and, like, the upgrade items. But a lot of the other stuff I found was surprisingly approachable, like having the mana rocks and the ammo pouches. Very surprisingly plentiful and not very expensive either. So it was just a very welcome sea change from, like, Elden Ring and whatnot. One of the next big improvements for FromSoft is doing more multi-button techniques like this, and agreed. Yeah, Umbral is like quality for magic. That's a really good way to phrase that, Alfarius. If you had this system and the spells were less in quantity and had higher variety and physical elements to them, they'd be the best Souls. Oh, if Souls had this system? Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of like earlier in the stream, I was talking about, like, the reversal of FOMO, and I feel like I'm getting that with Lords of the Fallen, where I'm, like, annoyed that I beat the game early enough, because now that they're adding in more spells and quests and stuff, it really helps round out a lot of these builds, because when I first played through this and I went through, like, all the 3 magic systems, I'm like, Umbral's kind of weak. Well, I kind of figured it out later on, and I was like, Radiant is extremely strong, Inferno is pretty good, but it could be better. And Umbral is just kind of really trash at the beginning. But now that they've added in more spells, it's helped, like, round them out. So Umbral has more things that you can do towards the beginning of the game. And then it just gets really strong later on. Radiance has always been good. And then Infernal, it just has a couple more options as well. So, yeah, I don't know. You wish there's a catalyst for dual casting, not rings. So... yeah, I see what you're saying with that. The Karian sorceries are probably the most fun you've had spellcasting in a game. What if you like buying 999 poison arrows? Not allowed, Mortis. It's not that Umbral is weak, it's just that Radiance is better. So it's not that Umbral is weak, like, later on, it's that it's contingent on, like, what spells you get. And Umbral is a very slow build up to, like, get off the ground before they added in, like, the moth dudes, like a spit attack or, like, the poison concoctions. Like, now that those 2 spells are in the game, that makes Umbral builds way more viable way earlier on, if that makes sense. Yeah, quality for magic, that was Dark in Dark Souls 2. Yeah, it's pretty much exactly like Dark from Dark Souls 2. But calling it quality, I think, just makes it a bit more tangible for players. Because, like, if you say it's like dark magic, you're like, oh, is that like Dark in Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, or Dark Souls 3, you know? So, or just like Dark Souls 1 pyromancy. I guess that's not true, because those scaled off of the catalyst. Anyway.
In conception and utility. Aside from the basic fireballs for my Pyromancer build, there is a spell where you summon 3 Rogar Hounds that surround the targeted enemy and light them up with a steady stream of fire. Very useful against bosses and slower enemies. There's also a big fire hammer that you jump up and slam into the ground. And I found this really useful when enemies kind of crowd me, rush me, and mob me. And not only is it very stylish, but it makes you feel powerful and it's easy to use. Like I say, I haven't tried Umbral.
The thing is, like, even though I was kind of ragging on Umbral, each build actually feels really good in their own way. Infernal weapons, like, if you ever use 2 grinning axes where you can do ignite and burn build up, it is just absolutely sickening. It's brilliant. and their infernal spells are kind of like better support spells, surprisingly enough. And obviously, like the hammer move is like one of the better infernal spells, especially like for PvP because you can like knock people down. Although, let's not talk about that. And Radiance just has like a lot of support options as well as like straight up nukes, which is just kind of crazy. And then Umbral just goes really, really hard on the nukes, especially once you get like Umbral Agony and like the shotgun spell. So it's really cool how they're all viable and have like their own different flavors. Because even if you're not like a spell user, as Smo has been saying, you still have like bows and crossbows and other thrown items to help round out kits. So it's one thing that I really, really enjoyed about this game. The Javelin has both utility and damage, exactly. You get the Umbral Bomb spell as the real broken spell, but the Javelin is just so much more useful if you can't look at the floor quickly before point blank Umbral bombing them. It depends what Umbral Bomb you're talking about, because Umbral has two of them. Umbral Agony is like the gigantic orb that has a huge AoE, and then the other one, I always forget what it's actually called, where you shoot like the 5 orbs that explode and can like shotgun damage. But yeah, it doesn't take a lot of time at all to look at the ground, especially for like Umbral Agony.
And Radiance much, but from what I've seen, they are equally as inventive and powerful. There's an Umbral spell that calls down a rain of corpses. Infernal.
Oh yeah, when I finished the game the first time through, I was on my Radiance build, and I was essentially unkillable because I stacked the Aura of Tenacity, which gives you like more damage resistance, and then the Aura of Healing, which was a heal over time. So I could just face tank like the Sundered Monarch's attacks and just like keep attacking him. So yeah, it's just really cool how diverse that they kind of like made it feel for the 3 branches of magic.
It feels really strong and satisfying, and the upside is for this build, I'm not losing anything by fully investing into this stat. Because in Lords of the Fallen there are weapons that completely scale with Inferno, so I don't need to waste putting points into agility or strength, and it just feels great doing a pure Inferno build. The weapons feel great as well. On my current playthrough I am dual wielding 2 Infernal weapons, a Raw Mangler Axe and the Bloodlust Sword. Both of these weapons inflict burning, so it builds up quite quickly, and as you would expect, this applies a damage over time effect, which can be pretty significant against bosses. But on top of that, the Bloodlust Sword also applies bleed, and this behaves as it would in a Souls game where a meter builds up, and then it does a chunk of damage. So here I have a build that can do infernal damage over time with my weapons, inflict bleed, and has access to powerful pyromancies. It just feels great, and it's a massive contrast to my first playthrough build, which was a heavily armoured, unga bunga sword wielding maniac. To augment the weapons and spells you use, there is of course the expected Ring and Amulet system, which is basically a staple of RPGs at this point, each giving you a passive that you can fit into your build. But there's also rune socketing for your weapons, and Umbral Eyes can be socketed into your lamp, which gives new passives and abilities. Some of these are quite significant. One of my favourite Umbral Eyes is the one that gives you 8 seconds of invulnerability when you first switch into Umbral. And this is a massive boon in boss fights, giving you 8 seconds after your first death to
I'll be honest, it took me way too long to realize that only the quote-unquote main Umbral eye socket gives you like the main benefit. I just didn't really pay attention to that. I was like, I wonder why this isn't working right now. Oh man, this game's bugged. No, but the Umbral Eyes is actually really cool, and they have a lot of potential to really change the builds up right now. I'll let Smo keep talking, but if he doesn't like talk about the one that I want to talk about, then I'll talk about it.
even the score unhindered. This is only scratching the surface of the variety of builds that you could possibly make that combine all the elements of the games. This is what you want from a Souls game. Variety and
Yeah, so a couple of the other ones, the Umbral Eyes, which can completely change your build, is that one will allow you to continue to throw your thrown items even if you don't have any ammo. So instead of ammo, you start using your HP bar, but rather than your actual HP depleting, you'll start taking withered HP damage. So you always have the chance to gain that back. And ironically enough, if you hit an enemy with the thing you throw, you're going to get HP back anyway. So it just kind of became the self-sustaining, what's the word? Like machine gun of just throwing things. So I could just like throw like 60 cleric banners that deal damage over time in their radius and just like melt things from like across the world, which is just kind of sickening. Another extremely cool Umbral eye was the Eye of Loesch, which allows you to not get posture broken or staggered if you're charging up a charged attack. And if you ever get hit during it, you'll take wither damage instead. But there's a really interesting drawback mechanic to that where if you actually get hit in your swing for the charged attack, you'll still take like the full damage, which is a real pain in the ass. So you need to get really good at knowing the enemy's timing so you don't screw up your charged attacks. But it just makes you completely invulnerable and can make you literally unkillable while you're just doing a charged R2 or anything like that. All right, James Vance, you have a good one, and thanks for dropping by. FromSoft's been pushing for more multi-stats for each game, but having completely specialized melee options is a much better approach. You hope they keep giving us more spells? I think they probably will. I'm not sure how many more, but it seems like they want to do that. That's your favorite, the Eye of Loesch? Yeah. As a quality man, since DS1's Claymore, Scalawag is sad to see how with each game, the levels needed in each stat to get higher damage keeps going higher. Elden Ring needs to be like 60-60 to be worth it, depending on the weapon. Yeah. Elden Ring is very different because like typically the level meta has been 125, but with the game size, it feels like you could very easily get to 145 or 150 to deal with Millennia, you know? Yeah. Sword of Saint Trina, your beloved. And that's the other thing with Elden Ring is that they have some really interesting like statuses, but very few ways to get them reliably. Like sleep, you can only get on like what 4 or 5 items, like weapons or whatever ways. And like the Black Flame weapon buff, you either have it on like essentially like the Ruinous Ghost Flame from the Helfen Steeple. Well, I guess that's different. That's not Black Flame. Or like the what is it like the 30-second buff from the one God Slayer spell incantation, and that's it. It doesn't have like the longer version. You just have the short one. So hopefully they add in some more ways to make buffs available in the DLC. Because, you know, the DLC will fix everything, guys. You did 150 in Dark Souls 2? Yeah, well, Dark Souls 2 is also a pretty high base level game. You were glad Elden Ring brought that one back? Interesting. Okay.
Replayability, something Lords of the Fallen offers in spades. It's a small thing, but I also love the effort gone into the starting classes. Aesthetically, they are all just really, really cool, distinct and flavourful, and have a meaningful impact on the early part of the game. For example, on my current playthrough, I am roleplaying a follower of Adir, the demonic god of this world. And so I started as a Pyrrhic cultist, someone draped in the flayed skin of humans, bearing a human hand as a talisman for fearsome Pyrrhic abilities. Just how cool does that sound? Best of all, you can unlock some even more awesome starting classes, and I won't spoil any more on how to get those, but
I think that's a cool idea, but I think that they really end up becoming noob traps because if you play a different character, you screw yourself out of achievement progression, which not everybody cares about, which is perfectly fine. But for those who do care about it, it's definitely not obvious that it's going to work that way. So, yeah, I don't know.
my god, they are so cool, both in equipment and in fashion. I know Remnant 2 did this as well, and I really hope that more Souls-like games include unlockable classes that are really cool, as it gives you something to look forward to and a sense of reward. Lords of the Fallen also delivers in another aspect that many of us who love the Souls games do: fashion. Not only are some of the armor sets in this game really cool looking, but you can also apply different color sets to each armor piece individually through the tint system, and these palettes are just found throughout the game ready to pick up. It's a small thing, but very welcome for those of us who care about the fashion in these games.
Yeah, for my second playthrough, I did something pretty much exactly the same, where I made my own infernal follower deer, and I like draped myself out in the fashion. And I honestly felt kind of bad about it because I felt like I never was able to live back up to it. Let me look for a screenshot for you guys. I mean, I've shown it off on some of my videos, essentially. All right. Is this a good one? Okay, maybe. Spoiler alert. Anyway, so this is my character over here, and that's just kind of like the way that I rolled with it. Oh man, I can totally see the film grain here. It's pretty bad. So yeah, I was rocking that from the very beginning. You can't see it, but I have like a tail on this character essentially because of my armor, and I felt like I never like lived back up to that.
When discussing a Souls-like, we of course have to talk about the bosses. For Dark Souls, while the exploration and level design was the fundamental basic of the game, the bosses were the tentpoles that anchored the experience. Likewise, I find that the Lords of the Fallen bosses largely deliver on this expectation because of one word: fairness. I've heard people complaining that the bosses are too easy, and I would disagree. They aren't easy, they just aren't overtuned. For those who play these games all the time, like myself, they may appear easy, because they follow the most straightforward rules of this genre. They have well telegraphed attacks that you can roll through, block or parry, and then there will be an opening for you to attack.
I can kind of see where he's coming from with this, but I do think some of these bosses were also undertuned, and I think part of that is because like when you get to the late game areas, you can just like completely out damage them, and obviously like they've buffed them since like this review and stuff came out. But when I first fought Tancred, I had been co-opted into somebody else's world, and I was like, holy crap, I'm like level 42. I do no damage to this guy, and so like he kicked our asses because I guess like my host was like also underleveled. So I was pretty much just like a distraction. I didn't really do anything. So like, man, these bosses are extremely tough. And then when I got to Tancred in my world, I just steamrolled him because he just didn't have enough health to really be like that much of a threat. Obviously, I also was a little bit more familiar with him, but yeah, Tancred wasn't. He was a pushover. Dervla was a pushover for me. The Hushed Saint was a pushover for me. Spurned Progeny is also kind of a pushover. Like I struggled. I think I like died once or twice just because I didn't understand a couple of the Spurned Progeny's attacks. Sundered Monarch, I beat pretty easily. I don't remember how many attempts it took. Judge Cleric was also easy, but the fight felt really good and rewarding. So the boss that I struggled against the most was Pieta, but that's because I was like still learning the systems and like trying to parry everything. So it took me a minute to get good. But yeah, I don't know. So I do think Smo has a point that like a lot of their attacks are telegraphed well, but I feel like at the very beginning of the game, like maybe their base HP is a bit too low, or they weren't quite as aggressive as they could have been, or maybe a little bit of both. Themed character runs are a huge part of the Souls replayability for you. Having more unlockable characters would be insane. Yeah, unfortunately, to get the set that I did, I had somebody else drop me the items that I wanted. But I really enjoy starting the game with like a fresh character and upgrading everything on my own rather than like going into New Game Plus. So I dropped like the base level of equipment and I just barely raised my level enough to be able to equip that stuff. And that was pretty much it. And I had a blast my second playthrough. The word overtuned lost all meaning after what you saw people complain about in Elden Ring. What specifically? Because I have something in my head, but I'm not sure that's what you have in your head. Souls fans when you don't have to memorize every move and know how to fight just to win. Yeah. Hashant was the only boss you really struggled with aside from Pieta. Oh, okay, yeah. The other boss that I did struggle against was the Light Reaper, but that's also because I was bound and determined to fight him in Fitzroy's Gorge. A lot of times, the Lords of the Fallen, you get stuck in attack combos that you can't break out of, so you have a second to know the boss is going to hit you. Yeah. I feel like the worst offenders for me on that were like the Bringers of Stillness when they do their helicopter attack, if you know what I'm talking about.
Again, in this regard, Lords of the Fallen is most like Dark Souls 1, where I'm sure many Souls veterans also see the bosses of that game as easy now. Many people complained about the state of Elden Ring, because a lot of the bosses to them felt unfair and overtuned.
Oh yeah, Eliane was also kind of difficult, but I felt like I was I was having more difficulty with my build than her specifically. But yeah, so there are some actually pretty good bosses, but I don't think that I feel like they were a little bit undertuned, even though Elden Ring is overtuned sometimes. Elden Ring also did have like a couple like really good bosses, but for me in Elden Ring, like Moog, I think is a really good single person boss. Whereas like Margit is just like a bit too much, especially for newer players.
And while I personally didn't mind these changes because Elden Ring gave you the tools to compensate, people who didn't like this will certainly prefer Lords of the Fallen boss makeup. And in regards to this game, I would personally prefer that the bosses were fair than overtuned. I had a great time with all the bosses, even the couple of gimmick ones. I felt very satisfied coming out of them. We of course need to shout out the art team when it comes to the bosses. It's clear that spectacle was a huge consideration when designing these guys, and it's hard to argue against the result, right from the first boss Pieta, and the likes of the Spurned Progeny. The Light Reaper is probably aesthetically my favourite boss. He is after your lamp, and he attacks you at several points throughout the game, making him feel like your nemesis in a way that Margit sort of did in Elden Ring, and he just looks so awesome in his demonic armour, his cackle, and his giant dragon. There are also some mini-bosses dotted throughout the game that are essentially this game's way of introducing you to an elite enemy type that you'll be facing further in the level. And I think it's a great way for you to be forced to learn these difficult enemies' moveset, especially since you'll be fighting them in larger numbers further down the track.
And that is something that I do agree with, and I do see how this can be a polarizing thing where it's like, oh my god, this enemy is reused. Why do they keep just reusing all these enemies? I can totally understand why people would get frustrated by that. But by the same token, I think there is some validity to like having a more intimate experience with some of the elite bosses. But I feel like that could have been alleviated somewhat by having one or two extra enemies of each faction. And then I can't imagine so many people would complain about like enemy variety and whatnot. Dr. N thinks the Bloodborne bosses as a whole were easy, but they did feel satisfying to you. But this game's bosses didn't do it for you. Yeah, I can see that. I don't think Bloodborne's bosses are like super easy. Well, I guess like the base game isn't that hard, and some of it is really dependent on build. I know like a lot of people either crash on the first four bosses of Cleric Beast, Gascoigne, Bloodstarved Beast, and Amelia. There's typically one amongst the four that is like the real progression killer for many players. So, yeah, I don't know. Whereas I don't really think there's a real progression killer boss in this game other than Pieta. And maybe Eliane. Those would be like the only two that I could really see.
When it comes to the regular enemies, I think these are also great. Again, the art direction from the art team is incredible for each and every enemy. Looking at the concept art, you can see the team had a clear idea of the types of enemies they wanted to portray, and they're really grim and gritty, and I love it. When it comes to enemy variety, I think there's a decent level for the length of this game. For reference, my first playthrough took me about 30 hours. There are Umbral enemies only found in Umbral, and then there are Rogar enemy types, essentially demons, and then there are the Hallowed Sentinel type enemies and corrupted humans. If this game was longer, I would expect more enemy types, but for the length of game, it's completely fair in my eyes. The Umbral enemies are all unique, minus the zombie types, which are reskinned at various points in the game, just for basic mobs, basically. The Rogar and Corrupted Humans mainly have a unique roster, but they do have a couple of reskins. But overall, I think there is plenty here, and from an art direction perspective, they are fantastic. The Ruiner and Skin Taker Rogar are particular favourites of mine.
Yeah, maybe they just needed to use like the Skin Taker a couple other places, because the Rogar type enemies feel like a little bit overused at times, but they do have like some extra ones. They're just like really rare. The Conflagrant Seers, yeah, you could also add them like in another spot rather than just the other like Fire Witch. I don't remember what they're called. The Conflagrant Seers are the ones that you fight in Brahma's Castle. So if you fought maybe that one there, like one of the Conflagrant Seers in Calrath, instead of like the first witch, I think that probably would have been a good thing. And then if you had like another skin stealer somewhere else, that might help. But regardless, I do think they probably should have had one or two more Umbral enemies at the least, just because Umbral is like the most consistent faction that you're going to face throughout the game. BSB seems to be the one new players complain the most about from what you've seen. It flails a lot, but it only has like what, 4 moves? Yeah, BSB is probably like one of like the first ones that players complain about the most. But Papa G and Cleric Beast are like the first gateway bosses. You didn't have too many walls in Bloodborne except for Brightus, the 5 hours with the Blades of Mercy. Rikuyo made the game perfect for you. And like the thing about Rikuyo is you get that so late. I wish you could just like start a game, like a fresh game with something like the Rikuyo. When you reached Ludwig, you decided to go into New Game Plus because it killed you. Because you killed it in your 4th try after you heard he was hard. Yeah, the first time I fought Ludwig and did the DLC, I did that on New Game Plus, and that was it was definitely a challenge. Orphan and Lawrence took a bit more. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, there's usually one of the DLC bosses, other than, well, yeah, just one of the DLC bosses that trips somebody up. So I didn't really have any problems with Maria or Orphan my first time through, but Ludwig was the one that got me. Seers are just the abyss with the reskinned enemies. You don't feel anything towards them. Nonetheless, they have a couple different like move sets, and then the other like witches just get a bit more like they just become a bit more redundant.
Incredible reimaginings of the demonic Rogar as they were conceived in that original 2014 game. Often as a lore guy, the most important part of the game is the feel and story of the game, and Lords of the Fallen is very rich in this regard. There is a lot to be found here and a lot to love, and I will be doing dedicated lore videos on this game, so subscribe if you're interested in that. Lords of the Fallen is a soft reboot, wherein the game is set so far from the original game in time that it looks and feels different and can have its own identity, and you don't need to have played the first game to enjoy it. However, the original game is still canon, a fact betrayed by the fact we have elements of the first game still present here. The judges, Adir, Antanas' descendants, and of course Harkin, the player character of the first game. So Lords of the Fallen has the advantage of being able to do its own thing, which it has done, especially in terms of its darker, more gothic presentation and the lore of Umbral, but also has the advantage of building off the foundations of the 2014 game. I think these factors give Lords of the Fallen a really fascinating and well thought out lore, from the politics of the kingdom and the religious hallowed sentinels, to the cosmic elements represented by Adir, Aureus and Umbral, right down to the suffering of the regular people at the hands of the brutal Rogar and the corrupted hallowed sentinels. And it really is a dark game, and I'm an edgelord who loves a dark game. It's dark and gritty like Diablo 2 or Doom, but in a 3D Souls-like game, especially in areas like Calrath, a city that's been burned and plundered by the Rogar, where innocents have been butchered and reformed into grim effigies to the god Adir. This all really appeals to me, the demonic flavour, the darkness of the world, and the respect for the original game's lore. And it makes it rewarding to read those item descriptions, to listen to those NPC dialogues. There's a lot to learn about and examine. Add on to the fact that certain points of lore are hidden behind Inferno and Radiant stats, and it gets really intriguing. It gets 2 thumbs up for me in terms of theme.
Yeah, I have a couple mixed feelings about that, because it is cool to have a bit more incentive to like go down the Infernal and Radiant routes, sort of, or like both, just to get that extra bit of flavor text. But I can also see how it'd be annoying to have that stuff kind of like arbitrarily gated away from certain players. But then again, a lot of players also don't even read the item descriptions to begin with. So anyway, mixed feelings on that.
Feeling, atmosphere, and lore, and I cannot wait to dive into the lore with you guys. Of course, I need to mention the issues with the game, because while I personally didn't care that much about them, I don't want to disregard or minimize the problems that people have with the games. I think the main one, from what I can see on Steam, is the co-op not being quite as seamless as other people would like. I haven't played it on co-op, but yeah, that is very disappointing for those who wanted to play it with a friend full on, full through. And so while it hasn't impacted my experience at all, I do accept that that is not great for those who wanted to do that, and I really hope the team at Hexworks fix this, as I'm sure it would bring these people back into the game.
You know, I appreciate just anybody being able to be insightful and respectful enough to recognize that other people are having legitimate issues, and not invalidating them completely by saying like, I didn't have these issues. Because I think that's one of the most frustrating things that a lot of gamers do about like certain games. Like obviously Cyberpunk is a little bit like low hanging fruit here, but it's just the first example that pops into mind, where there was a certain subsect of the population who didn't have issues playing Cyberpunk, and they were just kind of like they would just kind of like dismiss like a lot of the issues that other people were having because they weren't experiencing them themselves. So I think it just really becomes a terrible smokescreen for developers who only like listen to the people that don't have issues, when people like just kind of try to sweep them under the rug. So I think it's important to recognize that not everybody's experiences are going to be the same, I guess. Apparently multiplayer is partially fixed in the recent patch. They've said that every patch. I haven't really messed with it a lot. There have been patches where it's been more stable for me at times, and then the next patch like messes it up, and then it gets fixed like 2 patches later. But so far, the fact that I see them continuing to iterate and trying to make improvements to me is a very good sign. And because of that, it does give me a lot more goodwill to give to the developers. Just because it isn't perfect yet doesn't mean that they like can't make it perfect, I guess. So I'm just kind of like crossing my fingers, not exactly expecting that they'll fix it, but you know, just kind of like quietly hoping. And so that's kind of like why I made like the last video, was to just hopefully help nudge them in a more positive direction, since they did go ahead and already implement some changes. Cyberpunk caused people to have seizures on release? I didn't hear that. I just heard like it wasn't good, especially for the consoles. Oh my god. Game shouldn't have been sold. People who didn't have issues with Cyberpunk exist? Yes. If you ever went to like the subreddit, there was like a low salt Cyberpunk subreddit, I think it was called, something like that. And also welcome back to the stream, Stella. So yeah, there's like obviously like the issues with Cyberpunk were too numerous to ignore. Okay, let's use a better example, like Pokemon. That's probably like one of the better ones. There's so many apologists for the Pokemon franchise. Like they defended the crap out of Sword and Shield, and then like Violet and the other version of Violet got released, and like it was just as bad, actually, you know, worse than Sword and Shield. But because gamers just shout down the people who talk negatively about like the Pokemon games, It just doesn't put enough pressure on Game Freak to make quality games. So it's just very frustrating when gamers end up being the leopards that eat their own face and allow devs to make subpar quality products, in my opinion. Okay, that makes sense. With the seizures, epilepsy, I'm assuming. Your Xbox heated your house that winter? You remember Cyberpunk really well? You can be too casual about games that you're unable to see the issues with them. It's people who like going into detail that see the issues. And yeah, there's truth to that, as well as people being too deep into the weeds where they like can't get an accurate issue, like a perspective on things. So I think another good example to compare that to would be like World of Warcraft. Like a lot of the players that play WoW are so deep in the weeds of WoW that they don't realize like how bad of a game it is until they actually stop playing the damn game and play other games instead. If anybody's like familiar with Asmongold, he's always been like a huge WoW gamer and like a Blizzard fanboy, and it's only been like pretty much recently in the past couple like 5 years or so where he's really started playing more games and started like having his eyes get opened that there's a lot more improvements that could have been made. And it's like kind of the whole adage about like boiling what is it, like frogs or something like that, where like they don't realize the temperature is rising until it's too late. So like WoW is kind of like a problematic game because like a lot of players were okay with like really not harmful, but just like pointless, grindy systems that just kind of like eventually killed the soul of World of Warcraft, where nobody gives a damn about it anymore, especially with like Dragonflight, because that ship has already sailed because they just killed the player with like death by 1,000 paper cuts, you know? As in apologizing for how bad the launches were. Or not just like apologizing, but like sweeping things under the rug because their experiences didn't match the negative experiences that other players were having. AW8, welcome to the stream. There's still problems with Cyberpunk. I'm sure there's still some problems, but at least based off like the most of the community feedback that I hear, it sounds like it's a hell of a lot more stable. I'm sure there's like stuff there, but it's probably like a more acceptable like game. Probably has a more normalized amount of bugs, I'm assuming, or like issues. But just because of like the atrocious launch, I don't really follow it strongly, and I'm less than interested now. Witcher 3 was pretty busted on release. People just forgot. Okay. A lot of WoW streamers were like, this is the bad part about Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn story. Exactly. Exactly. Some WoW players have been wowing for over a decade. Yeah, you think it's sunken cost fallacy? Yeah, a little bit. It's just, yeah. Your friend Ashley's like that. And I mean, like, I don't want to, like, harp on, like, WoW players, but they're pretty easy targets just because, like, they'll defend terrible systems because it's just legacy content for them. So one of the things that really annoys me about WoW is like how much content is just like dead content. They only ever really care about the most recent expansions. They never really go back and update the old world. Obviously they do sometimes, but I mean, not having wow, why am I blanking on the floating city's name? Other than like that place, like they don't really ever go back and like re-update the non-capital cities. So like besides Orgrimmar and Stormwind, when's the last time they did anything with Thunderbluff? When's the last time they did anything with any other the regions? Cataclysm, It's not a World of Warcraft, it's the expansion of Warcraft at this point. But anyway, I don't want to keep going down that route. Cyberpunk's good after the recent patches on PS5? Okay, sweet. You deliberately waited until they made the good patches, like what happened with Witcher 3. And another example of like a game like really being busted on launch and then eventually getting good is No Man's Sky. Apparently, like that's actually a really good game now. I'm kind of curious to try it out just because like I was so skeptical and like against it to begin with. But yeah, I don't know. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. The city-state of Warcraft. Why revive the thing with changes to the skills is done drawing tons of people back in? Oh, it's why the revive thing they're doing with changes. Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. The Season of Discovery. Yeah, it's like classic WoW, but different. Yeah. I'm not sure what DE is there, Teen Sith. All right, going back to the video here.
There's also the issues with PvP, and this is in regards to the netcode or connection. The connections feel very hit or miss. When it works, and when it doesn't, yeah, it really doesn't. When it's not working, it is pretty bad. Opponents flying all over your screen, rubber banding, and then you just die because something else is happening on their screen compared to what's happening on yours. However, this does have great potential if it's fixed. The invasions that did work felt like chaotic fun, and reminded me of the classic Dark Souls. And if you want to see some really good footage and more honourable duels by someone who's a far more talented player than I would recommend Ouroboros videos, which I will link below. But I do hope the devs do try and fix this system, as there is a lot of fun to be had underneath the connection issues, and it's definitely worth salvaging.
Yeah, whenever I manage to do PvP and not have it like devolve into like a Radiant duel, essentially, where somebody just uses Aureus as judgment, but whenever like we got to engage in actual melee combat and the connection wasn't terrible, I actually had a lot of fun with the PvP at times, but then other times just like either a one-shot build and whatnot. It's just a little bit too inconsistent, and you never really know what you're going to get, I guess, to borrow a quote from Forrest Gump, with the regards of PvP, and it's just too imbalanced, I think, for most people to really palate it.
In general, there have been some performance issues on PC, and again, I don't want to minimize this at all. People have had legit issues, and again, I'm sorry for those people. For me on PS5, it barely impacted my playthrough at all, so my positive experience is definitely mitigated by that, and I acknowledge that. I only had a few crashes and a couple of frame drops here and there, and already on my second playthrough after several patches, it's far better performance-wise. So again, none of this was nearly large enough to impact my largely positive experience with this game. The only real issue I had that impacted my first playthrough is I did feel the mob density and enemy health was quite hard in the midpoint of the game. On my second playthrough, I know what I'm doing, I know what the game's about, so I haven't felt it as much at all. However, again, I'm an experienced Souls player, and I can't help but think that some players who are new to this genre, or even just new to this game after having not played a Souls-like for a while, will struggle unnecessarily, just due to some mob density overtuning, in my opinion.
It's kind of funny because I really just enjoyed the original mob density. Yeah, can't really say more than that.
And even with this main issue that I had, I do think it's an easy possible fix. By toning down the inflated health of some enemies at areas of high density. When a lot of us first played a Souls game, Dark Souls 1 for me, I think we can all testify to the fact that that was also frustrating at points. Especially in the catacombs, where there are tons of skeletons that regenerate, while there are necromancers that fire fireballs at you. Of course, the difficulty of this area was offset by the fact that each skeleton and necromancer had relatively low health, and I think with some rebalancing of some enemies' health at certain points in the game, it would solve many of the issues that I and other players had with these encounters.
One of the weirder things for me was the lack of differential experience between like a beginning level area and a high level area. Like, this dude here gave a crap ton of experience relative like to this part of the game, but when you go later on, you're really not going to get much more experience than you would get from fighting this guy. So it just kind of became surprisingly grindy trying to get enough materials to be able to upgrade your weapon, just because they kind of became prohibitively expensive, especially when they like changed it so that all special weapons would require like 10 upgrades as well. That was a really weird and dumb patch, the way that they implemented it, but I don't want to get into that.
Look, I will be the first to admit that I'm not the most critically minded person. I can't analyse the issues that games have as well as some other reviewers. When I play a game that I just like the feel of, I am absolutely prone to overlooking its flaws. Lords of the Fallen comes together for me, holistically, and so any issues that it does have, and there are issues, are simply incomparable to its strengths, in my...
So one thing that I really wish, and this doesn't really apply to what Smo is talking about right now, I think it would be so cool that if you like got the Radiant Purifier class from first beating the game on the Radiant path, that you could get this like the original like golden halo around you, and then maybe if you beat the Inferno path, you could get like the Corrupted Judge Cleric one on a new character. That would give me a lot more incentive for the fashion to go back just to get this thing on another character. But anyway, I digress.
And there are issues, are simply incomparable to its strengths, in my opinion. But that's it. I wanted to acknowledge the issues that others have had and mention the one issue I had. For me, I just wanted to talk about my own personal experience. You'll have to decide for yourself whether this is a game you want to get into by looking at all the available reviews and taking all the information about your own systems and consoles. But for me, I had a fantastic time with this game and I absolutely loved it. I cannot stop thinking about it. For me, this is the best non-FromSoft Souls-like ever, capturing the magic of that Dark Souls 1 perfectly in terms of exploration and bosses. I've heard amazing things about Lies of P and I will play that as well. But in terms of aesthetic and setting, I am a fantasy guy, so Lords of the Fallen is obviously going to top out in that front. While it's like Dark Souls 1, Lords of the Fallen has also done a great job in creating its own unique identity, something I didn't think it would in the earlier parts of this year. In its gritty aesthetics, in its lore, in its Umbral two-world system. I think the thing about it is this game is just full of heart, made by people who really care and want to make good games. I had the pleasure of meeting some of the team back in July, as I mentioned earlier, and there was a moment when I finally beat a mini-boss when I was trying out the game, and the creative director, Cesar Vertuso, came over and gave me a high five. I got to interview the man himself afterwards as well, and it essentially became a chat between two guys who just love lore and stories, and seeing this passion from Cesar about his project and the world that he and his team have built was so refreshing to me and infectious. And if you do want to see a transcript of my interview with Cesar, I will link it below. It's available free to everyone on my Patreon. And that's it, guys. This is a game that's full of heart, full of passion, and just captures that Souls-like magic. It's just that scratch that so many of us have wanted since Dark Souls 1. It's not a recommendation, as I said before.
That Demon Souls music in the background.
You have to consider your own situation in regards to your PC systems or console and what you want to get out of the game. If you just want a single player experience, it's going to be harder to beat this if you're someone that loves Dark Souls and fantasy like I do. And that is why Lords of the Fallen will likely be my game of the year. But let me know your thoughts below, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate and I'll try and answer them as best I can. But until next time, guys, I hope I will see you in the burning fields of Mornstead. Take care and have a wonderful Umbral.
Huh, they're broken. It's weird. Alright. Oh yeah, I should have liked the other videos too. I'm not in my like streamer brain mode. Alright, so this was Smotown's video that we just watched. If you guys want to give him a like, a sub, or whatever. And I'll go ahead and link in Ratatoskers and the IGN ones.
Let's start with something I liked in Lords of the Fallen.
I was not trying to loop that. Wrong one. Okay. So yeah, as far as like the Judge Cleric thing, I know there's like a Judge Rogue, and I can't remember what they actually call the other judge. So yeah, the names I think might be a product of like coming from, I think, an originally Spanish speaking studio. So it might be like a bit of a weird localization going on, I guess. I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I don't really think I have enough time to go through Mortismal's Gaming's video, but I'll probably continue to look into this more on my own now, but I wanted to at least share my first experience going over it with the chat and everything. So, alright. Love it when Soulslike just throw nouns together to feel more esoteric. that's a way too emotional stance for you to fully consider it as a positive, because it is cool to see passionate people and you like hearing the devs talk about the story and why they like their ideas. Yeah, so that's a really cool experience Smo had. I didn't have that myself, but I still enjoyed Lords of the Fallen. I thought it was a really solid single player experience. I definitely don't regret my time playing. It could have been smoother overall. I am a little bit frustrated that they've continued to update the game more after it's released, with the caveat that they're updating it after I've already spent my time playing it, because it just kind of makes me feel a little bitter for not having the complete package after buying the complete game, you know? So, yeah, it just makes me more reticent to spend my money on brand new games, because more and more nowadays they're not releasing completely finished, which is just frustrating. Like, even though Elden Ring is great, Final Fantasy 16 was, a complete game. It's like, why buy them now when you could just wait until like the DLC's out and then get like the true total package, It's just a little bit frustrating. One day you'll get a sci-fi Souls-like that's in a cyberpunk setting, right? I doubt it. Actually, maybe a Souls-like with that. That'd be interesting. I'm trying to think, because like at first I'm like, Dead Space? No, that's more of like a horror thing. But a Souls-like with that. You could only pray. Well, I guess you have like the Jedi survivors, don't you? And you give them a whatever. The DLC won't have updates. You were a completionist, forcing yourself to go through it. Yeah, understandable. Like, it's fun to complete things when they're not ridiculously tedious. And Lords of the Fallen became really tedious towards the end, which is unfortunate. And I say that as somebody who's like platinumed Disgaea 5. And the reason why I would go through and platinum a game like Disgaea 5 is because like the base mechanics are really fun. And there's a lot of fresh stuff on your way to going to get that platinum and whatnot. But less so for getting the collectibles in Lords of the Fallen. You don't regret your time with it either. You were going for the Radiant ending, the one you're missing. You just realized you weren't enjoying it. Yeah, that's fine. And sometimes it's fine to just like let go of the game and then come back after a couple years when you're like, oh, I remember that game. Oh yeah, I never did that. I want to go back and do that. When you've forgotten everything, because it just, I don't know. It's something that I like to do, which is kind of why I want to go back and play Alundra, because it has been so long since I've played it now. I barely probably remember anything. And it would almost be like akin to a blind playthrough. But since I've already gone through the game and like beaten it before, I don't really mind if I get like backseated or like need to look up help, because it's a pretty challenging game. Yeah, maybe, okay. I'm going to take a little bit of extra time to show you guys a trailer for Alundra or something like that. Maybe not the trailer, but this is an extremely cool video. This one's pretty long. What was it? It was like the 22-minute one. Alundra, the Legend of Zelda, Successor of Your Dreams. So I watched this like a week or two ago because I was telling Moxie Watts about it, because she's a really big Zelda content fan and she never heard of this game, and this to me has always been like a Zelda game for adults. But it's kind of like Zelda meets Bloodborne before Bloodborne was a thing, believe it or not. Okay.
If you were a PlayStation action-adventure game junkie in the late 90s, you might
Maybe
recall a fairly obscure title named Alundra. A spiritual successor to a popular Sega Genesis game, Alundra puts you in control of a blonde, pointy-eared protagonist with a penchant for swords, bows, and bombs, while exploring a vast, dangerous, and puzzle-filled world, and all from a three-quarters perspective. Sound familiar? Alundra has often been compared to The Legend of Zelda.
Hey, that's me.
Reason.
I did
When
that.
first comparing Link to the Past with Alundra, you see a bright, beautiful world of high adventure, and a simple combat system augmented with a wide array of tools and instruments, immediately recognizable to fans of the series. But it was more of an evolution of the Super Nintendo version of Zelda, rather than the fully 3D Ocarina of Time, which made sweeping changes, which are now looked on with some contention. And though Nintendo left behind the two-dimensional overhead style of the original games for the later Zelda titles, the 2D portable spin-offs seemed to become increasingly less inspired. Aside from the purported 2.5-dimensional A Link Between Worlds, the classic style of Zelda seems to be all but abandoned. Now, Alundra might sound just like a simple knockoff of Nintendo's ElfQuest Classic, but similarities start to fade as you delve deeper into the game's design. 6 whole years after Link to the Past, and a full year before Zelda's Nintendo 64 follow-up, this lower-profile spiritual successor featured a more fleshed-out story, deeper characters, darker themes, challenging puzzles, and a universe begging to be expanded on. In short, this was The Legend of Zelda grown up.
And it's kind of funny to me that he described it that way, because I always call this game like Zelda for adults, so we just pretty much had the exact same takeaway here.
It is with great interest that I examine 1997's obscure classic adventure, Alundra.
I'll play like a couple more minutes
Really
of this
can't bring
and
up
then
Alundra without
close it out
sneaking
from
The
there.
Legend of Zelda into the same sentence. The original Zelda for the Nintendo Entertainment System was the very first console game to feature a battery save, a worthy feature for the generation-defining, open-ended gaming experience of the 8-bit gaming era, and its influence echoes through hundreds of games even today. But Alundra's direct inspiration has its origins on the Sega Genesis, with a 1993 action-adventure game called Landstalker, created by
So you ask, where can you play Alundra? So if you do still have like a working PS1, that is one route to do it. I think you could potentially get it on the PlayStation Store with a PlayStation 3 or a PlayStation TV. And just earlier today, I was like going through like my old hardware to see like how this would work. I'm gonna need to like, in order to be able to stream this, I'm gonna have to get like an HDMI splitter because the PlayStation TV has some like weird HDMI protocol that just like DRM blocks it. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna need a little bit of time to like get all the hardware troubles like figured out. But yeah, I intend to use the PS TV and we'll see how that works. But you know, originally this was a PS1 title. But I really wish that this would get like ported to Steam or something. It's one of my like favorite platformer games. I also really liked Landstalker. That's how come I knew about Alundra, because I heard it was like the spiritual sequel successor to Landstalker, which is one of my favorite Genesis games. In terms of it being a complete story on release, for the most part, yeah. So wait, I think maybe a comment. Checking out Lena's Inception for a cool Zelda-like? Okay, cool. I've never heard of that. Yeah, if you guys have like games or videos you want me to look at, make sure you like leave a video comment, because it'll just kind of like go in one ear and out the other for me right now, just because like no capacity to store new info while I stream. Have I played Tunic? No, I've not. Oh yeah, that one looked really cute, and then I just kind of forgot about it. You've heard only good things about it. You have to put it on streaming with PS Plus Deluxe. Yeah, I wish. This game's kind of forgotten about.
Developer Climax Entertainment. It was
Gonna
a bright,
skip forward a little
colorful
bit.
elf sword and the wielding first and Climax.
Landstalker's a
Entertainment
cool
formed
game. I
production
recommend
project.
it. Maybe not so much
But
now,
rather
like the
than
controls are
45-degree
wonky.
angle, presented a straight-on view, similar to Zelda: A Link to the Past. With Sony Computer Entertainment as their publisher, Matrix Software was now creating the Zelda equivalent for the new and popular PlayStation console. Its anime influence was clear, with big 80s hair characters and fully animated cutscenes. The visual charm and sound design mimicked that style as well. Having state-of-the-art hardware at its back, the graphics have aged gracefully along such contemporaries like Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Metal Slug. Added to this was its bright and energetic.
Yeah, I absolutely loved sprite-based games back in the day, just because they had like a certain level of charm that, you know, as you just said right there, have aged gracefully. Whereas like we've got our 12 polygon per screen Final Fantasy VII game that just kind of doesn't hold up so well to the visual test of time.
Soundtrack by Kohei Tanaka, who has composed for countless anime shows, movies, and video games, ranging from Pokemon to One Piece, to the popular PS Vita title Gravity Rush. Working Designs was signed on as the American publisher of the game.
I'm gonna skip ahead.
Translation is his
Okay.
diary. Speaks about a girl you chanced across earlier and only alludes to her being her daughter at the end of the conversation. It just feels natural and therefore more engaging. Alundra was much more of a story-driven game compared to the earlier Zelda games. After a bit of
And I did skip a little bit of what he said. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but it's all good.
heavier writing at the game's start, A Link to the Past can then go on for hours with little to read. In contrast, Alundra digs into dark and uncomfortable themes, like watching the slow...
Alright, so I think that's a pretty good idea of what you guys would be getting into if I were to stream Alundra. Just because I feel like this game is a great game, pretty deep, and I just want people to know more about it and maybe get the chance to play it themselves. So, like I said, to me it's kind of like the cross between Bloodborne and Legend of Zelda. So I think it'd be a cool thing to stream, since I'm already destroying my algorithm. Anyway, if you guys are more interested in Alundra, here is the video from Indigo Gaming. I've already watched it. It's a really good video. I've already liked it. So yeah, go ahead and watch that if you'd like. So for all of you who've tuned in for today, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Happy holidays if you celebrate, and if you don't, I hope you have a good one. We will be going live again at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we will be looking at a couple more videos for Elden Ring and Dark Souls lore. Let me see if I still have the thing up. So tomorrow we'll be checking out Nakey Jakey's video about how From Software's game design changed everything, because I haven't watched this one. I've watched like one or two videos by him. Very interesting guy here. And then we have two videos by Moxie Watts, who I recently come into contact with, and she started making a new foray into transitioning from Zelda-based content to Elden Ring-based content. So I'm very curious to see what her first two videos on like this subject were like. This wasn't like her first one, but anyway. And then we have Understanding Queen Marika with Cosmos, and then Wender's a longtime friend of the channel, and his recent video on Dark Souls lore, Will, Duty, and Suffering tomorrow. So hopefully we'll be able to get through all of these, and if not, it'll be good, and we'll pick stuff up. If you guys want me to react to more videos in the future, let me know. I'll add it to the list. I need to add a bunch of stuff that I haven't done because I've just, been lazy, not done it. But I have like compiled all of the things you guys have suggested, so just let me know. So once again, thanks for dropping in, and take care. Last Protagonist out.